very good evening to you and a good evening to anyone who is following our live stream as well. Welcome everyone to this meeting of Business Support Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I particularly welcome our substitute members this evening who are kindly giving up an additional evening on council business. So our thanks to Councillor Edwards, to Councillor Thorne and to Councillor Adeoye. And that, I believe, means that we have apologies from Councillors Teresa Murray, John Williams and Councillor Curry. I think that accords with the record. I know some members are running a little late. I know there are some traffic issues as well. We will welcome those members as and when they arrive. So item 2, colleagues, is the record of our previous meeting and also of the combined joint meeting of committees both from May 10th and 18th. Are members happy that we accept those minutes? Any issues arising? And you happy that I sign where I'm required after the meeting? Yep. Thank you, colleagues. Item 3, urgent matters by reason of any special circumstances. I've not been made aware of any. No? Okay, thank you very much. Item 4, I know that we don't operate whipping on the ONS committees generally. Does anyone have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests? Councillor Doe.
As I'm being held to account for the two companies as part of the council's, as part of my council duties, I'm of course ought to note that I'm a director of both of them, and we have been given a dispensation by the Council Conduct Committee. Okay,
thank you very much indeed, Councillor Doe, and indeed a very warm welcome to you and to Councillor Galvin. Thank you for attending this evening in your capacities as members of the Cabinet and Portfolio holders. Just for members' information, after our session with Councillor Doe, we will take a fairly brief coffee, tea break and comfort break at that point. Colleagues, as we usually do, I will invite that we go straight into the reports which, as it were, accompany the attendance of our portfolio holders. Although it's not a perfect science, I will attempt to suggest that we deal with topics and issues in a grouped way, and we have on both reports, both accompanying reports, the indication of the areas of responsibilities for each of our Cabinet members, 11 bullet points, for example, set out for Councillor Doe. I think it would be sensible, and we have many numbered subheadings in both of the reports before us. I think it would be sensible, so far as possible, if we look at the items by way of the bullet point responsibility headings. Doesn't fit perfectly with the accompanying reports, but I would suggest that that's a good way forward, and I invite any members, therefore, first of all, to show in relation to homelessness and housing options. For substitute members, my practice is to encourage members to show as we, as it were, announce, or as I announce the topic, so that I know, try to be careful that I don't miss anyone out with any questions that they might have. So anyone on homelessness and housing options? Councillor Maple.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Howard. It's good to see you here. It's good to have at least one deputy not running the show. Perhaps we're seeing that elsewhere by the end of the day, potentially. Who knows? Who knows? I wanted to... You've got a wide portfolio, so there'll be lots of questions tonight. On homelessness and housing options, I mean, I think it's worth reiterating the point. You know, I will criticise where it's appropriate, but I'll give credit where it's due as well. The approach that we took as a council when we had the edict on everybody in was strong, was quick, and was an effective use of the relationships, the well-matured relationships between the council and certainly one or two local charities in particular. And I want to recognise that. I wonder from your perspective, do you feel that as we're not over COVID yet, but we are moving away from the likelihood of having a national lockdown, I think. Do you think we've learnt some good lessons from that process? Secondly, obviously we want to try and avoid homelessness. That is something which all of us would strive to have in our community here in Medway and across the country. We are in the middle and continuing to be in a cost of living crisis. And I have a real and genuine concern around numbers of repossessions. And actually, you may have people falling into the system who have perhaps never been in the system before. So have you had any initial thoughts or put anything in place at this stage specifically around trying to stop those who are homeowners at the moment but could end up falling into the housing cycle because of the cost of living and potential increases in mortgage rates as well? And then finally, on homelessness and housing options at this stage, I think there was consensus. I remember back to the debate that we had in this chamber on the pretty disgraceful process we have or had, and maybe we still have, I'll hear from you in a moment, that we were taking people from elsewhere in the country, and then we were sending Medway residents elsewhere in the country, to Bradford in particular, which colleagues will recall from the motion that was debated and agreed generally on a cross-party basis. So, two questions really. Do you have a sense, I don't expect you to have an exact number, if you have, great. Are we still sending people out of area? And if we are, where is that number currently? The answer, I suspect, will be yes, because of things like domestic abuse. So that number will never be zero. I don't think anyone would expect that. But certainly at the time of that motion, the numbers were excessively high. So an indication as to where that number is as to out-of-area placements when we're carrying out our duty, and perhaps an idea of location as well. Some people may be happy moving to Swale or to Maidstone, but not to Manchester or to Bradford. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me deal first of all with that last point about are we sending people out. I think the answer to that is, as far as I'm concerned, there was only one case I think that did slip through the net at some stage, but I think that was some time ago. As far as I'm concerned, the object really is not to send people out, because I think it's very important. If you send people away, any distance away, I'm not talking, as you say, about joining boroughs or something like that. If possible, we'll house them in Medway anyway, and that's what we've done. But I take the point, and I think the main point is that people don't, if you take someone out of their complete circle, then, you know, they're losing their links to their schools. The school has to start again. They lose their links to their friends, and all those support mechanisms, which really mean an awful lot. You know, even homeless people have links. They're not just counters to be moved. And I think that we have to be very sensitive in the way that we deal with that, and we are. The second point about the lockdown and also you know, how we avoid homelessness. Well, first of all, I think you can never totally avoid homelessness. I mean, this idea that I've heard breached by a number of politicians that it's kind of a sickness that has a cure, you know, it's not. It basically means that you have always got people who fall out of the system. They may be, for example, families and rows and that sort of thing. We try very hard to prevent homelessness, and indeed we have got a very strong record on prevention. I think we've dealt with something like 650 prevention cases successfully, and some of those have gone into housing, some of them we've managed to head off possession cases and so on by reasoning with landlords. Sometimes it's family people and so on, where there's been a fallout that we may be able to reconcile the parties. So we use all those kind of methods that are there, to sustain people. And of course, the ultimate thing is we put them into temporary accommodation. But I think that the lockdown has had quite an effect, because what it means is, I mean, that's why I think a lot of domestic abuse cases, for example, have risen. It's because people perhaps are living in a different way to what they've lived for years, and the relationships which may have been good for one form of life may not well be very good in a lockdown. We're all locked down together, you know. So I think that is a problem. But I do believe that on repossessions, certainly we have a liaison so that we've got a representation in the court, as it were. We also try and get to them before that a repossession happens, and we see what really is the problem. If it's a financial problem, a genuine financial problem that can be resolved, i.e. then we'll have a look at that and make sure people, for example, are getting all the benefits to which they're entitled and so on. And that's our tenancy sustainment, the sustaining group, but that also extends to people that are in that situation who otherwise would become cases that we'd have to help. So we give that short-term help if we can. If relationships, for example, with the landlord have broken down completely, then there is very little you can do about it if they've got grounds for possession. But normally, you know, we would take the view that possession, as indeed we run our own housing, going for possession is the very last resort. And the only thing I think that will enable a possession to succeed, if you like, without is if somebody's absolutely determined to go down that route. They're determined not to pay their rent. Some people withhold rent because they have issues with the landlord, which will help them try to resolve, you know, issues of repair, that sort of thing. He's not prepared my place properly, therefore, you know, I'm not paying my rent. We will get in there and make sure they do what it says on the tin. But I think in general, you know, we run a pretty tight ship on homelessness, and I'm very pleased that we do, because I'm very passionate about this. I don't think anyone really should be homeless, not for any period anyway. Sometimes, of course, it's very difficult to spot them, but we do we have dealt with a vast number of cases, and in most of those cases, we've either moved them into the sector of where we're temporary accommodation or permanent accommodation, or we've given advice or help with things like rent guarantees and so on and so on. So we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox, and we'll use all those to make sure that you know, we prevent that happening as far as possible. I hope that answers your question.
That's some helpful responses, so thank you. Can I just go back specifically to, because I get entirely that, you know, we're in a different world with the cost of living crisis, and private sector landlords may be choosing to withdraw their property because they need to sell it, or they want to go and live in it themselves, whatever. I think that the thing I'd like just a little bit more on is around homeowners who are at risk of losing their home and falling into the system, which is probably a problem we haven't really had to deal with for a number of years, because we've had low inflation rates and low interest rates. We're likely to not have either of those as time goes along. So it's just, and if the council hasn't yet started to think about that, could they, please? Thank you.
Certainly it has been the subject already of some discussion between myself and Mark and Dee when we've had our meetings on this. And, you know, we're keeping a very close watching brief on it. If we find that that there's a sort of avalanche of possession orders coming down the track, I don't think there is, because actually there's going to be more, but I don't think it's going to be an avalanche. And there will be a bulge we'll have to deal with. We will deal with it. If we need extra support at that time, we'll take it on and do it. But as far as I'm concerned, you know, if there is a genuine crisis in people's finances that's making them homeless, as it were, then I think, you know, one of the tools obviously is that we can intervene and talk to the mortgage company and tell them to be more reasonable. We've got people that actually we deal with that, you know, that we, for example, have a contract with the CAB that intervenes often with other bills and so on. We can, if somebody's in real trouble, bang, and they can't do anything about that, we may be able to do something on that sort of line. So I'm not saying that the council can insulate people from the effects of the economy, but what we can do is to make sure that we give as much help as we possibly can to those who are on the receiving end of it.
That's really helpful, thank you. We may come back to the word insulate later on in our discussions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Doe, for coming tonight. Can I focus on young people and homelessness in particular, young adults? Your report details a number of ways in which the Council is attempting to help what I think is probably a not uniquely vulnerable, but certainly a highly vulnerable group of residents in Medway. And it details what the Council is able to do, attempting to do to support them. Mr Brethwick's a member of the Corporate Parenting Board, so looked after children and care leavers have a focus, and I know his presence on that board is a very positive thing. I was thinking of young people coming out of custody, and I see from your report that there's a number of places for people coming out of custody, not necessarily young people, but there are also places for young people as well. I think post-pandemic cost of living crisis, there is a reasonable focus on these younger people starting out in their lives and the role that secure housing would play in getting them off to a good start. So I'm just wondering what, if you could sort of pull out, from your point of view, the council's or your focus as a portfolio holder on that group of young people. I'm wondering if there's particular signposting and support that might be available to them. I'm wondering what preventative measures may be taken if they do get into difficulty with rent, what financial advice may be available to them particularly, and what recognition there may be that they may be vulnerable to various things, CSE, gangs, substance misuse, those sorts of issues. So, and actually a specific question related to that. On page 18 it says that there are 310 households in temporary accommodation. It's a bit related to what Councillor Maple was saying. I wonder how many of those 310 households have children, and how many of those households are in temporary accommodation outside of Medway. Thank you.
Right. Well, first of all, dealing with those, are they inside or outside Medway? They are, I believe, all in Medway, and I've no doubt Mark Brethwick will contradict me if I'm wrong, but I've always believed they are all in Medway at the moment. I think on the question of dealing with young, we certainly have a strong relationship with our youth department and so on, but I think there are a whole raft of solutions that we can offer, and they come really from working with the people concerned. For example, it may be a lot of the initial cases come from families, where it's no longer possible for a single person to actually live in that environment for one reason or another, or they find that it's not getting on. And what we'll try and do is to help that person through with what tools we have, as I was saying earlier. They could be possibly some, we can, for example, put them in temporary accommodation to start with. We can then work out with them as to what possible alternatives there are. We have a number of housing associations with whom we work quite closely. Some of them have got specialist accommodation and so on. So I think, we have got a raft of solutions for it. And it very much depends on what the actual circumstances are of that particular person's state of life, whether it's financial, whether it's something to do with their illness and so on. We would signpost them to the appropriate council department if there's something, medical or something like that needs to be dealt with. So there are, as I say, people are very different one from another. And, there's no one size fits all, but we try very hard to make sure that we serve everybody as best we can.
Thank you for that, Councillor Doe. That's very helpful. Just coming back to the temporary issue, I asked how many children were in temporary accommodation. I think actually thinking about it, what I'm getting at is we were assured, I think two things. What we were assured that there were no children in bed and breakfast some time ago. I was just wondering whether that's still the case. Yep, that is still the case. And I think we highlighted in response to the Adverse Ombudsman report a couple of years back about the close links that there should be between housing and children's services, and the very fact that young people, families with young people are in temporary accommodation may itself be a risk factor that should highlight them to children's services. So I'm just wondering whether that's, an issue has been taken forward.
Well, certainly we work much more closely with children's services, or they work more closely with us. There were barriers, I think, before, but now I think those barriers are broken. And I think there is a realisation that the housing service can contribute to a lot to these situations. It's something we've always been telling them, but now the message has got home. So I'm very pleased about that. I think that the question of we have to work together with all the tools, in other words, all the departments of council. As far as I know, that there are certain folk. If it comes through housing initially, then obviously I can guarantee to you that we will involve the departments that are necessary to resolve the problem. If it comes from another department, then we do have regular liaisons with our colleagues, for example, in various branches of the youth service and in children's services, and we do make sure that we do all we can. Now, you asked me a question which I didn't avoid, but I didn't answer. I'm sorry about that, and that is on the question of how many children there are in temporary accommodation. Certainly, I don't know the number at every. Obviously, you can't expect me to know the number a day on day. But what I'd say as a general principle is this, that I don't think it's a good thing for children to be in temporary accommodation. Children need a firm base on which to work. And I think that if they haven't got a firm home, as it were, they don't know what's happening and the tensions that causes, then I think, that is a very, very difficult situation that they're in. So we try to house children as quickly as we possibly can with their parents and so on. So families, I don't like to see families at all in temporary accommodation for that reason. There are also, of course, other reasons why people are in temporary accommodation. For example, they need to be assessed. Somebody comes along, for example, this evening and says, I've just arrived at a point where I'm on the street, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. We've got to do something about it, and we've got to put them into temporary accommodation. Or we may even, under those circumstances, even have to put them in a bed and breakfast for a night or a hotel. But, I'm just saying that as a general principle, we try to make sure that with our housing association partners, we get children housed as quickly as possible and in a way which is sympathetic to the whole of their lifestyle, if they're in school and all that sort of thing, or they have the circle. I think we're very much aware now, and I know this is the housing service generally is, of how important it is to try to get people back into the circles that they work in. They know. No point in taking them, putting them in the other end of the borough and that sort of thing. So the whole life solutions are much more attractive, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Etheridge, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Howard, for coming along this evening, and thank you very much for this report. I'd like to direct your attention to page 23, if you have a copy of your report in front of you. Item 6, under the heading Domestic Abuse Act 2021. 6.3 in there identifies a number of initiatives that you have started, stating that officers have commissioned reports, new dispersal accommodation, and various others. I'd like to know exactly where we are with all those various reports and initiatives to see how much longer we have to wait for them to be implemented. And secondly, has anything else been thrown out from that commissioning those various reports to identify other areas of support we could give? So that's question one. Question two follows on to the next page on page 25, 7.9, where we're looking at the importance of disabled facility grant to help residents live in their suitable housing and remain independent for longer. Whilst I was on planning before I was removed, I requested many times we have a policy review to say new developments not only should have affordable housing, but also housing that is adaptable for disabled people, such as the being on the ground floor, wider doors, etc. I'm just wondering if you're able to give me any updates of where that policy has gone to or disappeared to, and if it's something you would support in the future. Thank you.
I think first of all on the question of the service that's in force there, I think that we actually do try and make sure that discretionary improvement grants for that sort of thing, you know, are actually worked through the system rather quickly, and I think we've actually speeded that up no end by having occupational therapists within our own setup rather than having to go to another department. I think that helps a lot. I think with regard to the commissioning service for domestic abuse, yes, we have got the service up and running. We're improving it all the time. I think what we've learned, which is another question which you asked, is that it isn't always necessary to put people, because of domestic abuse, to put people miles away from where they are. I think that can be a very cruel solution for all the reasons which I was talking about earlier. You know, I think that and therefore we are trying, where it's possible, to put them back in Medway, but not. It is a difficult line to tread, and those people that are suffering that or have suffered that abuse, we need to join with them in achieving those solutions. We don't just simply regard them as people that we're going to stick in a particular place somewhere, you know, and you can get on with it. They need a lot of support. They've obviously been through a very traumatic period. Particularly, of course, where children are involved, where, you know, the fact that their whole sort of substrate has just suddenly collapsed. And, you know, I think that's very wearing on the children and can change their lives. So we try to really make sure that we've got all that in place, all the advice, all the help that we can give them. And I think that what we're doing all the time is reviewing the service to see if we can make it even better. But the main thing that leads on that service is actually the person who actually is suffering that domestic abuse. We want to get a solution that they can live with and that you know, is safe for them, which I think is the important point. It's matching safety with lifestyle, really, and getting it up and running, and not simply sort of putting people in the home and then saying, well, now you can get on with it, you know, because it's not the way things happen. So the support is there, I assure you, and if ever you find an instance that it's not there, you let me know, and it will be. Okay?
I'll come to Councillor Parr and Councillor Turpin in a moment. I wonder if I could just, at a slightly different angle, but pick up on a point that was within Councillor Etheridge's second question to you, Howard. And my point is this: Councillor Etheridge referred to essentially what the requirements may be in a planning application as to shared ownership or social housing. I'm wondering if, and it may be a task for the planners, in which case fine, but I'm wondering from our overall housing perspective as to whether we get feedback that, as it were, those requirements of the planning applications have actually been met. In other words, that the social housing dimension required by that planning consent is put in place in due course. Do we have any sort of feedback as to compliance and numbers? Because the planning application consent will often specify between rent and shared ownership, for example. So I'm interested whether there is any form of monitoring in that after the planning consents are given. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, could you use
Sorry, I think I do believe that the planning department does monitor that, having spoken to Dave Harris on the subject. But I think that the problems that we have sometimes are, you know, I think with development it is very difficult at the moment. I mean, the market is not functioning well, and we therefore need to watch that. I do agree with you. And I think whether you get formal statistics and all that sort of thing, I don't know, because I wouldn't see them. But I'm quite happy to look into that for you if you wish. I should just say one thing which I didn't perhaps cover as well as I might have done with Councillor Etheridge, and that is the question of, do we ask for disabled housing when we do our new developments? The answer is, where it's practical, yes. We are very keen to acquire more units with special disabled access, because if you are installing disabled facilities in a house that isn't designed for it, in other words, you know, you're putting in something which either you've then got to have someone with an identical or a fairly similar sort of disability when you re-let it, or which could lead to a big vacancy, or alternatively you waste your money because you have to come and pull it all out. So I think have a purpose-built unit which then can be adapted more easily is a much better solution. Also, you know, we're trying very hard to include those units. They are expensive, of course, but, you know, I think they are very necessary, and we try to get ground floor accommodation built in anyway to a number of our schemes, as you'll see in our Phase 3 scheme, for example.
Thank you very much. Councillor Opara, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Doe, for being here. Still on the subject of domestic abuse, and 2.4 states that we had 30% increase in the number of those who obviously came forward for our help, 149 requests. I wondered, I know you may not know the exact figures, but roughly how many of those were helped, especially if they had children, how quickly that help actually was offered to them. That's my first question. And regarding, obviously, Medway becoming very, very diverse in our different communities, how the message of support is reaching out to those communities that are, well, in some regards, reporting domestic abuse it's obviously forbidden or not allowed. How are we ensuring that those communities are obviously reached and the help that individuals are entitled to, they're actually getting, especially if within those communities anyway, they're not permitted to come out, there's no trust between them and the authorities and what have you. What are we doing to ensure that they and sufferers within those communities are reached? Thank you.
Of how quickly we help. The answer is that if we have a domestic abuse case which is bad, we look into it as a matter of supreme urgency. And therefore, there isn't a question of just letting it go on for any period. But once we know, we act. And I think that's obviously the way it has to be. The second thing I think is I think very important as well in that equation is that I don't think that one of the things I'm always very keen on, and I'm always banging the drum with the housing department on, is that people who have committed abuse don't benefit from it. So if they're simply over-occupying a particular property, then they have to move. So, you know, that's that side of it. As to the question of diversity, we generally maintain liaisons with a number of ethnic societies and so on, you know, for example, the Ahmadiyya Muslims. But obviously, if there are any that you feel we haven't managed to establish where we are, we can't go looking for domestic abuse within communities. I think that's very, very difficult, because very quickly it would be seen as an interference, and I think that is not what I would want to do. But if there is any way in which the service can help, and they're not helping at the moment, perhaps you can help us spread the word as well, that we will change, you know, we will go in as we're needed. But what we can't do is to sort of go investigating into it to see if there is any domestic abuse, because obviously, you know, that would be a gross intrusion into a particular group, and they would feel they're being picked on. So it's quite a difficult line to tread.
Can I come back? Well, I wasn't obviously expecting you to go looking for where these are, but we have groups like the Medway Diversity Forum, perhaps working with them to ensure that the messages of help is actually being passed on is what I was alluding to. Whether you're working with,
Well,
yes,
we work
thank you.
with anybody who wants to work with us. We will work with, and we do have links with a number. I can't, I don't have a list of every organisation obviously in front of me, but we do work with a number of ethnic organisations, but to contact them and obviously to make sure when we're providing solutions for other people, they are done sensitively.
Councillor Turpin, please.
Good evening, Howard. Just a quick one on homelessness, because I know it's a very it's an issue which is prevention of homelessness. You've done very well on, but I had a tenant who was getting in trouble with rent arrears that got in touch with me, and he said that he was getting advice from officers not to move out of his property. And to wait until the landlord had taken legal action to evict him. So that isn't mentioned on your list of things that you do for people, but it has issues because it would leave that person with a record of not paying the rent, which might lead to difficulties in them gaining a tenancy in the future. And some of the other issues which were some of the other solutions which were put forward were available to this person, and eventually he did move out and find another place. So I'm just wondering why that advice wasn't proffered to this person, because this person said that he liked his landlord and didn't want to do that. He was quite upset that he was given that advice not to pay the rent and to wait until the full legal process had taken its course. So that's just, I'm just wondering whether that is the best advice to give someone, or whether that is detrimental to the future of that person in the future, that they've got that record of not paying rent. Because the eventual outcome was the landlord wrote off the debt and the person moved out, but moved out quickly, which saved the landlord hundreds of pounds in taking court action. So that was better for the landlord, and it was better for this person that he didn't get a record.
Well, can I just say in answer to that, that obviously I can't quote every single case. It doesn't come across my desk. But our general policy is obviously not to make eviction or seeking possession easy, because if we make it easy, you'll get more of them. So I think there's, we've got to hold landlords to account to that extent. I'm sure you'd understand that. Equally, we want to make sure that we don't put those tenants in a situation if the landlord, for example, is being very unpleasant and so on. So it's a very difficult line to tread. I think we do it actually, in a number of cases that I've dealt with, we do it actually quite well. And there is an understanding there about the difficulty of that situation. Those situations are always difficult. And I think that, I've got the highest regard actually for the way in which the department does deal with these. I think they deal with it very well. If there's one that you've got wrong and we haven't dealt with it right, you let me know and I will look into it for you.
Okay, thanks. Well, I know that in this case that the council didn't contact the landlord, and there was no sort of thing there, and the tenant had a good relationship with the landlord. So I know that it's very easy to bash the landlords, but it's not always the case that the landlord's at fault.
Don't take the view that if there's a bad landlord. There are bad landlords and there are bad tenants. And sometimes people have got funny ideas with regard to the relationship as well. So I think that, we just have to deal with these cases as they come up in a sensitive way. And that's what is happening in most cases, if not all cases. It should be all cases. And if there's one that slipped through, you let me know. And if it were possible if you'd spoken to me when it had gone wrong at the time, I'd sort it out for you.
Thanks. Can I move on? I'm interested in the climate change, the EV.
Sorry, Councillor Turpin, we're doing it by sections.
Oh, sorry.
Please, so by all means, we'll bring you back in later on. Councillor Tijam, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Howard. Allow me to comment, you're paying for the good work being done in terms of, I've seen the figures on benchmarking, in terms of temporary accommodation. We seem to be doing better than a lot more people, a lot other council. My question relates to the new year funding on the 5.7 that being granted to recruit a rough sleeper prevention officer. Where are we with that? Whether that officer is in place? And I also like to know whether you can give us some guidance on how many rough sleepers we may have in Medway. Now, following on from Councillor Ettridge's question as well, with regard to DFG and adaptation work, I'd just like to ascertain from yourself what criteria have we got in place for procurement or awarding these contracts, and how do we monitor the performance to ensure that our residents, especially those in their own property, are being treated fairly? Because we have seen some complaints in the past where there's been some problem with some of our providers. And finally, on the share ownership scheme, I have received complaints from residents who own part of their properties that tend to have the wrong end of the stake in terms, the wrong end of the stake in terms of repairs. For example, you may have a block of flats where part of it has been rented and part of share ownership. In that same building, if something goes wrong with the rented accommodation, it is swiftly repaired and put right, whereas in the share ownership, even if it's a communal area, they tend to just not get it resolved. So I just wonder whether we have looked into this, whether there's any safety net for some of our residents who are suffering these concerns.
Councillor Doe, just before you answer that, could I just tag on to that question exactly the same area? It may be easier for you to answer both aspects. I'm getting more and more concerned that despite the very hard work of your housing team, which is excellent, that housing associations are simply not respecting either the council or a number of their residents or shared ownership residents. And there are example after example, and Councillor Tijan has just given us another example. And I'm troubled whether there is seemingly not a method whereby we can, in a sense, persuade housing associations to carry out their functions properly, in whichever capacity our residents may engage with them. Because there's too many occasions when they don't respond, they seem to take no notice. The residents have already tried and given up and then come to us, so it's in our casework, and rightly so. Is there any other method that we can use to encourage our social landlords, that we deal with all the time really, to be more responsive and, dare I use the word, more respectful of the council and our residents?
Well, certainly we deal with a number of housing associations. If you look at, generally speaking, our relationship with them is actually one of respect. I mean, for example, MHS, where we've only got to pick up the phone to Ashley Hook and the thing, normally resolved. But I think I think I have come across occasions, generally, I think across the piece, where housing associations are getting too big, and therefore the original way in which they dealt with their tenants is the relationships are not as good, and I deplore that actually. But the other thing which I think is what can we do to control that situation? Well, obviously the first thing we will do is we will take it up with any housing association. Okay, you say, why should they listen? I'll tell you why they should listen. First of all, if they don't listen, ultimately, we have the sanction of taking them off our list. They will not do any developments in Medway again if they constantly think they can, behave in a way which is inconsistent with being as housing association landlord. Secondly, we can complain to Homes England about it, and of course their funding then would not be available to them if they carried on in that way. I think the third thing is none of them like adverse publicity, and that we can generate if necessary. And fourthly, of course, if it's complaints about repair and all the rest of it, we have the same strictures in place that we have with ordinary people in the street, private owners. If they don't bring their property, if they're up to reasonable standards, then we'll simply serve notices on them in the end. So I can't say which ones respect us and which ones don't, although I could mention one that doesn't, and which I think I'll talk to you about later, but we do have trouble with one. But I think that in general, they do take us very seriously, and they normally will respond to what we try to do. I think with regard to temporary accommodation, I think that we obviously have the relationship with the tenant anyway. They know and they are informed that they can contact us if there's a problem. But normally, we've got the sanction. If we find somebody is not providing temporary accommodation of the right standard, in other words, it may be the right standard either as a property or as a landlord, the landlord service has not been provided properly, then frankly we'll strike them off our list if they don't get better, and nobody else will go there. So, and that reputation can precede them, as they say. So I don't think we're without tools to do it, and I'd like to think we do. I think with shared ownership, the situation is more complicated because it's a legal relationship between the landlord and the tenant. And again, the only way we can really intervene with that is depends on the situation. If it's shared ownership through something like Homes England, the first homes, we can do something there. If it's we've got the normal remedies we have for ordinary housing, and thirdly, we've got the way of considering that we won't not only not use them anymore, but we can actually get on their backs quite heavily if necessary, if we get a whole clutch of cases. But it's very difficult to deal with minor issues, between a landlord and their tenant in that situation.
Briefly, Councillor Maple, then Councillor Thorne, who's patiently been waiting.
Thank you, and thank you for giving way. It's just on this. I mean, I think it's worth. I reiterate the point actually that Mark's team, they're under pressure constantly because there's a load of stuff going on. But the responses we get are very good. What would be helpful, perhaps through Mark and his team, would be an appropriate contact, either an individual or a councillor email address for all of the registered social landlords that are based in Medway. When I was first elected, there were 23 different registered social landlords. The numbers come down a little bit. But having a contact, again, through our excellent professional officers, just so that we as councillors can try and deal with it. If residents are coming to us, the issue has failed. MHS are pretty good, actually. There are some who are less good, and some who, even as elected members, it's difficult to find out who to talk to. So, again, I wouldn't expect you to have that information here, but perhaps as an action for Mark and his brilliant team, if we could be provided, for all 55 members, with a single point of contact, either an officer or an councillors at well-known rsl.com here, that would be really helpful, and I think it would save everyone's inbox a bit. Thank you.
Well, we can do that for all our landlords of any size, as it were. There may be the odd one or two that where it might be difficult, and you just do it through the council in that case. Of them, we will make sure you get a list. Every member of the council gets a list of those contacts. I think that's a very reasonable suggestion.
Thank you. I am coming to Councillor Thorne. If members could just bear in mind, do you have any other housing issues under the other housing bullet points? So I'm looking at in total the first 5 housing bullet points in section 1.1 in the report. If so, please show if you would. But Councillor Thorne in the interim, please.
Well, actually, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Howard, for attending. Mine is actually 7.3, which was about HMOs, so it still comes under the same category. Yeah. And I'm really concerned about, the number of HMOs that are currently increasing, which worries me from being on the planning committee. We see it quite often where an HMO goes from maybe 6 to 8 rooms. And it's a big concern of mine now reading 7.3 that you serve 10 financial penalty notices of intent and 7 financial penalty notices for failure to comply with HMO management breaches and failure to require an HMO licence. And I can only see this getting worse. So you've stated that there are now 3 cases with our legal team, but that's only 30% of the cases that you've seen. Can you update us as to what's going to happen on how you're pursuing this further, please?
How we deal with these is we try to avoid, obviously, the ultimate sanction of going to court. We try to work with them to get it done, because in the great majority of cases with HMOs, where you've got a landlord who's actually a landlord in name, in the sense that they're not professional landlords, I'll put it that way, then often the guidance guidance and determination will get you far further than going all the way through the courts, and that we've found. So normally you can resolve them in that way. But if they are then disputing the fact and they just will not do it, then we will take them to court. So, and that we've done successfully on some occasions, but that is a really tedious process and quite unnecessary, because most people, many landlords will not go to court because they know damn well they're in the wrong, and therefore they will settle long before that. So I would say that, just the fact that they've got those few in court actions there, it isn't a question that they're the only ones we're dealing with. It's a question that they're the ones, in a sense, that have failed to respond in any way and are being, put it bluntly, rather silly about the whole affair, because we have the power to deal with them.
If I may, well, you came out with a rather good statement saying there are some bad landlords and there are some bad tenants. But when it comes to HMOs, you're quite right in what you're saying, but I'm concerned for the tenants of those HMOs who are not getting what they should really have, and I think it's going to get worse as more HMOs can go through the process.
Well, I think that the way we run this is that we have, the different types of HMOs. Where the law requires them to have a licence, then we insist they have a licence and they are inspected. Now, you can, in addition, as we've had this discussion, I think, some time before, where you can actually introduce a licensing system over and above that which is required, a law, which would catch, the small landlords and that sort of thing. But frankly, it's very resource intensive, and we haven't gone down that road yet. We may do at some point, but, we've got to find the resources to do it. That's really the point. But I think that, you just take a view about that. I think if the situation got out of hand, then we would do it.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. On the other housing areas now, Councillor Maple.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for those comprehensive answers. I want to turn first to home choice. Again, I'm not expecting you to have necessarily this figure to hand, but I'd be grateful to be provided with it in due course. In your report, you talk about the number of active households on the register. I'd be interested to know the number of inactive, because I think some of those would like to be active, but the system is somehow against them, not least on the length of time living here in Medway. So I don't expect you to have that to hand, but if you could provide that, that would be helpful. Yep, thank you. I note with interest, and again, this could be an absolute outlier, I'm slightly concerned somebody has been waiting or had waited 11 years for sheltered accommodation. I hope that 11 years has finished because they've moved in to the property and for no other reason. But is that an absolute outlier? And there may be legitimate reasons. I think we've heard in the past, if someone wants to move to a specific property in a specific road, they're going to wait a long time. But 11 years, I say specifically for sheltered accommodation, gives me quite a lot of cause for concern. So those two on the issue of home choice. I then wanted to move to the issues around us as a landlord. It's worth saying that these numbers are impressive. You know, there can be no other doubt for that. You know, we are in a good place. But one of my concerns potentially is some backlog that could still be in place because of COVID with repairs. There could be a level of that where people particularly have, and I think we spoke about this maybe this time last year, where people have been proactively saying, I don't want you to come in yet. Now, I suspect in most cases that's now coming to a conclusion, but whether there is any of those sorts of cases, particularly where we would statutorily want to go in, and perhaps we haven't. I then wanted to, and this is particularly around perhaps 9.7, where we're talking around energy and getting to carbon neutrality by 2050 with our stock. I don't, for the avoidance of doubt, I don't agree with the campaign approach that Insulate Britain takes. However, I think their basic premise is right. And if you were to do a literal heat map over Medway, the number of houses that are losing literally pounds through their house is concerning. And that would be more concerning, and should be more concerning quite rightly, for us as a landlord, particularly in Gillingham, obviously, because that's where the vast majority of our stock is. So I wondered whether you've got a view very specifically on the insulation of our existing stock, I say predominantly in the Gillingham and Twiddle area, and where do you think we should be as regards good insulation for our housing stock directly? I'll probably pause at that point. Thank you.
I think if I can answer the question, first of all, on the question, I don't want anyone to run away with the idea that people are being forced into different, to be thought of not being in housing need. That need is assessed professionally, and as far as I'm concerned, whenever I get a case where it's alleged that has not happened, then I will have that reviewed. And so I don't think there's any question that there's anybody trying to fiddle the figures. I don't work like that. Please know that. Secondly, on the question of sheltered timescale, actually there isn't a timescale for sheltered housing. We have a number of units that sometimes we even have to let off normally, you know, because of it. I think that in general, sheltered housing is fine if you just want a sheltered unit somewhere in Medway. I think if you want a specific property and in a particular way, then a number of people do, and they feel that's where they want to be. And of course, if you set that down, you're in a queue then, which doesn't, you know, is really in a death queue, unfortunately, in many cases. And you know, you won't get there. So for quite a long time, and that's the case, I believe, with this 11 years gap. On the question of us as a landlord, the COVID backlog of repairs has been tackled. There are one or two things, obviously, that still are outstanding, but there's not much. And I think we're getting to grips with, we have got to grips with them. And we've got to grips very firmly with Mears about the question, and we have to be reasonable, both of them, you know, in the sense that we have to be reasonable that if half your workforce is sick, you can't possibly keep, you know, to the same timetable. But what we have said is that, you know, where repairs, where we have fallen down on repairs are very, very minor, as you'll see from the satisfaction figures. And I think that Mears have responded quite well, and they brought people in, and we have actually caught up very well. So I think we've got tenants certainly are fairly satisfied with the service. On the question of where are we with heating and so on, and how important do we think that is with fuel bills, etc., the answer, you won't surprise you to know, is very important. And we just actually taken on someone whose role it is specifically to look into these cases. You know, a warmth sustainability officer that actually is going around looking at properties for this purpose. We'll obviously have to prioritise them because when we obviously only have so much capital in the account, and it has to go three ways. One is it has to go into providing new homes. Secondly, to refurbish the existing ones, which is, this is what we had our asset renewal programme in place for. And that also has to deal with derailments, like, for example, the need to change fire doors and all that sort of thing, which does eat into the programme quite significantly. What we reason we want to get to this is we want to make sure that nobody, first of all, who really needs it, is paying bills just because we haven't got a properly insulated home. That's the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of people now find the tariff business quite baffling, and that should be able to give advice on that. And one of the things which we will be giving in our sustainability package, if you like, for tenants that find it difficult, we will look at those tariffs to see if they are getting the right tariff for their gas and electricity. So, and if necessary, we'll intervene with them and get them put on the right tariff. So I think that really is what we can do. And obviously, ultimately, if that is too much for them, then obviously we will need to get the CAB involved, and they will deal with with the energy providers. So I think we can't, again, using your word insulate, what we can't do is insulate people against rising costs. What we can do is to make sure that our homes are reasonably fit for the purpose. And there are, I think, a number of properties where they're not properly insulated, not even, to the basic standards we want, walls being too thin, that sort of thing. And we are dealing with that. We're dealing with that as fast as we can. So, that's why we've taken on this warmth sustainability officer, just on the basis it's not just a show, but we really do care about the fact that people are going to be coping with bills that they can't necessarily meet, and that they will use the wrong type of heating, but which causes things like mould and so on in the properties.
Thank you. I'll allow Councillor Maper to come back briefly. We will then move on to housing stock development.
Thank you very much. And Howard, for the avoidance of doubt, I wasn't for a moment suggesting you were skewing the figures. I was just worried about an old person waiting 11 years to get into a property. That was it. And I agree with you that if they're looking at it, I suspect, and if Mark Brethwick wants to clarify this after the meeting, I'd be grateful. I suspect that is an absolute outlier. On the new officer, that's interesting and positive to hear. It would be helpful when they've got their feet under the table to understand the scale of the issue and what looking at the HRA can only be spent once. What's the timetable? So if they're saying actually we'll need to look at 2,500 houses, but the HRA allowance will mean we can only do 25 a year, well then we need to have a conversation about that. So if we could have in due course feedback as to their initial analysis, because I think we both here but also on the climate change working group would be very interested to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that's a reasonable question. I think the other thing is, of course, it's what I am planning to do is at the moment we're revising our asset renewal policy because of the things like fire and so on, and also because of the heating problems. And so there is no limit in that sense. What the limit is, we have to make those choices which I've outlined. And I think, what we will do, we had an informal sort of group that met, which Nashaba was a member of, and we will take them through that policy later on this year when we got it all finalised. But obviously, when I say finalised, it's a position you can look at it. It's not finalised in the sense you can't change it. Okay?
Thank you. Colleagues, let's move on to any issues around the development of new council stock. That's section 18 of the report on pages 31 and top of 32. Any points on that? I know the developments are familiar, I think, to most members. Okay. If not, we move to library and community hubs, section 19 from page 32. Councillor Etheridge, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and once again, thank you, Howard, for your report. Can I bring your attention to that report on page 32 of where we're looking at 19.2 of where there's a capital fund to transform Lordswood Library into a community hub and further agreed funds to develop options for Water, Slade, Hook Meadow Library and community halls. And the reason I'm asking this question is I'm trying to find out, or clarification from your good self, do we actually own these buildings? And the reason, once again, I'm asking that is certainly I'm aware that it cost almost £1 million to transfer the Strood Library into a community hub, or the Strood building, shall I say, into a community hub, and we don't own that, we lease it. And as I recall on the original contract on that, when that lease runs out, if the original owner takes it back, we have to restore it back to its original condition. So I'd just like some clarification on that, please.
Well, it's a very long lease, I believe, if I remember rightly. I can't recall, it's got 2 or 3 years, but no, it's more than 2 or 3 years. So, we can let you know the length of the lease on that. I'm quite happy to do that. But we did take that into account before we did it. We're not silly. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's only the Walderslade Library, really, that we would have a problem with, which is the one you go upstairs, and that's on lease. And I'm not proposing to turn that into a community hub at the present time. But with the ones we're doing now, which is this Hook Meadow, which we'll be doing after we've done Lordswood, and Lordswood itself are freeholds, and they will therefore exist. But each time we do one of these, we do check out the legal position. So we won't be doing things that where we lose the investment, because the investment is very precious, frankly, and we can't afford it.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, I'd like to commend the work of the libraries and the archive work, particularly the range of talks and guest speakers that they have, which is impressive. I'm sorry to have missed Simon Armitage. I'll get notifications, but I've missed that. I've taught Simon Armitage's poetry in school, so I was disappointed to see that. I particularly point out the Fight for Rights, Women's Suffrage in Medway at Gillingham Library, which I went to see, and that was very useful and very interesting. Useful in the sense that it highlights some of the hidden history of Medway and of Gillingham in particular, and of some of the women who fought in the late 19th, early 20th centuries for suffrage. So I commend that in particular. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your vision for the libraries and the community hubs and how they're going to be used to meet the community's growing needs. I'm interested in any kind of benchmarking or ideas generating you're doing by looking at other councils or the local government association, for example, because I'm aware of a lot of sort of innovative thinking happening in this space. I know that Labour-run councils like Hackney are piloting a lot of initiatives like a library of things to allow people to borrow household items, and I can see that helps with sustainability and also with the cost of living crisis, and I'm just wanting to make sure that Medway Council is thinking along similar lines in terms of innovation and how we can get the most out of these hubs. Thank you.
Yes, it's a short answer, we are. And we are thinking of doing a number of initiatives. One of the things is that we are getting closer to, I think the real focus for us is to try and make the advice area larger, so more people can get more satisfaction out of our community hubs. And that's something we're looking at. But at the moment, they are doing what it says on the tin. They are actually fielding the inquiries. And I think the face-to-face position of the council, I think a lot of councils have closed their libraries without realising that what they were doing was closing a council, an important place within a neighbourhood that gave a neighbourhood focus. And that is what we're trying to do with community hubs. And that's why we put on these various exhibitions, why we involve local people and so on. And we've got loads of sort of volunteer groups and people that meet there. And we encourage it to be a community facility as well as a place where they can get advice. So it's a constant development situation. And I envisage that as we go on, for example, if we look beyond even the schemes we have for Hook Meadow and for Lordswood, if we start to look at places, for example, like Luton, then you've got to think of a much, much larger solution, a much more different solution, and one that is more embracing. So I think that they are a developing concept, let's put it that way, and one which I think has been very successful.
Okay, final questioner on this section, Councillor Maple.
Thank you. I'd endorse the comments of both Councillors Edwards and Johnson. I was sad to miss magnificent Medway because all of the performances clashed with stuff in my diary, regrettably. But I've heard very good feedback on that as well. I wondered, it's interesting to see in paragraph 19.2, for example, allowing them to be more reflective of the needs of residents. I wondered what the last time we did a detailed survey of service users to find out what those needs are in 2022. And it may be that actually everything we're doing is perfectly fine and keep doing that and more of some of the stuff you're doing potentially. It could be that we're missing some important stuff as well. So I wondered very, very detailed kind of resident feedback from people going to the library currently, not just necessarily the citizens panel or some general market research, but very specifically the people who are going there and using the services. Are they getting what they need? Are there things there that aren't? Are there things that they should have there that they haven't got? And indeed, have we got stuff happening there which is not being used? And actually, we could use that resource in a different way as well. So 2 questions. Has that research been done in the last 12 months, certainly post-COVID? And if the answer to that is no, can you do that, please? Thank you.
Yes, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't do that, and I think that we can do that. We do it informally, of course. We interact. One of the things which we want to do is to stop people librarians, and we have done this, stop them thinking that they're a resource that people come to, as it were. They've got to get out from behind the desks and mix with people, and recognising that they're our customers. And I think it's that customer relationship which is very important. So certainly we can do a small customer survey in 2 or 3 of our libraries just to see what's happening. And if we find that there is a mismatch of any kind, or there's an opportunity to add something which is not too expensive, we'll do it. But we'll have a look at that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, we'll move to the issue of Medway Adult Ed. That is in section 20 on pages 36 and 37 of the report. Any members on Adult Ed? If not, we will move on, please, to climate change at section 21 of the report, and from page 37 onwards. Any member? Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Chairman, and I fully appreciate the work you and your team have done on this, Howard. I'd like to take you to page 39, 21.3, of where you state a number of posts have been successfully appointed to and have been instrumental to the delivery of the Climate Change Action Plan, and obviously the Climate Response Engagement Officer and Climate Response Support Officer, and they're actively involved in delivering against the plan. My question to you today is, in regards to the plan, when are we now going to move into some blue sky thinking? Because primarily it's all very well planting a tree, but actually if we planted bamboo, it would use up 20 times as much carbon as a single tree. And we have a wonderful river that is basically seawater that's tidal, and once again algae and plankton and diatoms also absorb carbon at a terrific rate. And I'm just wondering when we're going to start looking at those sorts of things as well to assist our programme. Thank you.
Well, we have actually got a liaison, of course, with the university, and we are encouraging the sort of formation of a kind of think tank, if you like, on this sort of thing. I know Greenwich University is particularly interested in this. But the reason why we haven't gone into that is the fact we've got to get the basics right first, I think. You know, we've got to make sure that the things that are, I won't say the low-hanging fruit we've collected over the last years, what we've been doing, it gets harder each year when you do it. You know, I think that we are working very hard on it. I've actually no problem at all with looking at alternative solutions, and indeed that's why we've been discussing with the public, you know, how they come forward with solutions and so on. So as far as I'm concerned, if anyone around this table has got any propositions of things we're not doing, bring it up at the climate change group. You can always drop me a line and I'll bring it up, and you know, give us a proposal of some sort that you think we might be looking into, and I'll get it looked into properly. Thank you. Councillor Maple, please.
Thank you very much. I'd be interested, Howard, and I haven't looked at the other 30. I'll say that now before asking the question, but I'm not the portfolio holder. We're 31st out of all local councils in the UK. That's a good place to be. I welcome the fact we're not 131st. But what are the 30 councils, broadly, what are the 30 councils above us doing that we're not? Is it pace of change? Is it the diversity of stuff that they're doing? You know, we've got the best possible mark in some of the categories, but how do we get to be in the top 10 or the top 1? That's where I want to be on this. And then secondly, I'll ask you a question because neither you or I sit on the planning committee. Isn't it a good idea to have solar panels on Gun Wharf? I think it's a very good idea, and I hope you would too.
Well, I can answer the second one first and say I agree entirely. I don't know why they're being so stodgy about it, but that's a matter for them. I think the question of the top 10%. I actually was. I think I dismayed Richard Hicks actually by saying to him, "Well, I don't want to be in the top 10%. I want to be in the top 1 if we can be." But obviously, it's a question of what costs would be entailed in doing it. I think that the reason why we finished so high as we did was because we actually had got our targets and so on measured properly, and they could see how the action plan was sort of moving by not doing everything at once but doing things in stages. So I think that's why that was there. We've also, on my instructions, they've got in contact with a number of those that finished above us, and we've actually looked to see if there's anything we can learn from some of that. I'm still waiting for the feedback on that, but I know it's being done because I did a progress check on it the other day. So I think that there's no question to me, you can always improve. We're on a continuous improvement model. But one thing I do have to have regard to is, of course, the resources.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. I'm mindful of the time. These are vast areas, all of them important, of course. We move on to the voluntary sector, which is section 22 in the report from page 40. Any member on the voluntary sector? Councillor Maple.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a lottery now, and it's bringing in a few quid, and it is a few quid. I'm concerned that with the cost of living crisis, we are going to see not-for-profit organisations see their income streams drop, whether that is through regular donations, whether that is through people buying less things at charity shops, or indeed buying their own lottery tickets. There are some not-for-profit organisations who perhaps we don't tender with, and I think we should always recognise there's lots of great organisations doing stuff that we would have to do as a council if they didn't exist, but we don't necessarily have a contractual arrangement. I think some people in this council only think about the voluntary sector as people who are doing stuff for us. That's not the case. But some of those organisations, probably post-COVID, now in the cost of living crisis, may well cease to exist. So I wonder, as the portfolio holder responsible for our relationship with the voluntary sector and the fact that we have the good relationship we have, I think, on the whole with that sector. What do you think you will bring if we're in a situation where you have got one of those organisations saying, actually, we're going to cease to exist? You know, think about things like befriending, think of, you know, providing, you know, housing support, you know, helping those people in our community who need to eat. All of those organisations have limited funds, and again, those funding streams are likely to dry up because of the cost of living crisis. Are we ready to step in and support them, or are we ready to step in and do the stuff that they were doing and now won't be?
Well, I think it very much depends on what the organisation is doing. There's no one answer fits all. As far as I'm concerned, if it was something, for example, in the way of a social service that they were doing, like training and so on, then the first question you ask yourself is, if this organisation ceases to exist, what happens to that service? Is it just an added frill, or is it something that we need? In that case, I take the view that it's something we probably need, and it has a great value, having done some of that myself. So I think that you know, we can't give one side fit all. What we do is we liaise very closely with the Voluntary Services Council, so that we do know what is happening. And if so be it, there is an organisation that's doing valuable work and is likely to go under, then we will look at ways in which we can help. And also ways in which we can contact other people in the sector, for example, the NHS or whoever it may be. That's the object really of having the VCS in a contract situation with us. So they know that the door is open, and you know, we will do what we can. Unfortunately, we are limited to resources in the same way that they are. And it's just a question really of considering how the council's resources are used, if you like, as a portfolio holder. You have to consider that first. But I think that if the service is valuable, then obviously I would seek to try and maintain it.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. And finally, Kindy and MDC, any points there? Okay. I have two speakers only, so Councillor Maple first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maple. I think it's just a clarification. There's the issue of the recruitment agency and its relationship with Kindy, which actually is, I think, detailed more in Councillor Goldwyn's report. So we're going to raise that with him. So I'm just checking that that's the sensible place to raise it.
A quick
Okay, we'll have your take. Yes.
Sorry, in which case, can I frame the question I was going to ask?
Yep.
In Councillor Goldwyn's report, the recruitment agency is coming back from Kindy to the council. We raised a couple of years ago, I think it was, the issue of a fairly substantial amount of money going to that recruitment agency. I think from memory it's £300,000 for acting as a recruitment agency for social workers locally. We were concerned about the amount of money that went to it then. So there's that issue. I'd also like to ask the question, what value for money exercise has been done on the amount of money that over the years has been given to Kindy for the recruitment agency, and whether that value for money report is likely to go through governance, come to us. As I say, it may not be for you to answer that, Councillor Doe.
Well, I think the situation, frankly, in the recruitment field has changed. And I think we no longer, we actually reviewed all the businesses within Kindy, of which there are 4. And what I wanted to do was to make sure that we were focused very firmly on what I call real profit. And I think that if you're making a profit out of something which is actually, you know, we are not, which in my view, in the present recruitment situation, we weren't adding as much value as you know, there's not a lot, we weren't adding very much value to it, I felt. Whereas before, when we were maintaining, you know, we had a very close liaison with the market, we were doing that. I think that was something which really was pointless for us to continue. So although it's profitable in the sense that Kindy makes money, it's only making money out of the council anyway. And if there's any reason for us to do it from the expertise, I couldn't see it. So I think as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the board was concerned, we took the view that really wasn't worth continuing. And that's enabled us really to concentrate on the key businesses, which are really the CCTV but particularly the telecare and the Canary solutions. Would add that Kindy, as you'll see, is making, I think, a reasonable. We turn that round. It is now making reasonable profits.
Okay, thank you. And finally, to Councillor Maple, please.
Thank you very much. And again, Howard, thank you for answering all of our questions tonight. You've been here for an hour and a half, so it is appreciated. I do question, with the changing focus, whether Kindy needs to exist anymore, fundamentally. We've seen it go from trying to have a wide portfolio to narrowing that quite substantially. A number of councils obviously bought into the CCTV. They don't anymore. Has an assessment, I know there's a task and finish group looking at certain aspects of the telecare product, and I don't know whether that's finished yet or not. But has there been a fundamental question asked at any point as to does Kindy need to exist? Does the cost of Kindy outweigh the benefit of it existing? Question mark. Because we would still probably do the two things that are in there anyway as a council, as we are doing with some of the other things which have already been bought in-house. And it's worth saying as well, despite the name change, there is still an ongoing legal issue with former senior people within that organisation. Don't worry, I won't mention that anymore tonight before I stray into areas I definitely shouldn't. On MDC, and again, this may be a question for yourself, a question for Adrian, I might ask both of you really. Not in the control of Medway Council or Medway the area, I accept entirely, but the cost of living crisis has also had an impact substantially on the cost of building things, and whether and it's a different organisation, but the person who's ultimately financially responsible for this organisation and contingency are not the best of friends. I think that's fair to say. So I'm concerned that there now may well be situations where either the cost of building stuff becomes prohibitive, or indeed MDC may be working with other organisations whose cash flow means they stop working. And that's, subcontractors there could be in a risk potentially. I don't want to see any of those things happening, but I just want to get an understanding, and I'll be asking Adrian the same question, so he's got about an hour to think about that before it comes to him. Has the board considered the fact that actually the world from a construction perspective has changed dramatically, which is not the fault of MDC, but they've got to deal with the outcome from it?
Okay, can I focus first of all? I'll deal with Kindy. As far as I'm concerned, Kindy is now making profits. They're making sound profits. And I know that as regards our relationship, if you like, with the finance arm, and he knows I'll be rude to him if I want to be, but basically we're getting we're working in harmony, and very much, I think, we for example, at Kindy, we invite him to come to those board meetings. We're quite happy that we want to make sure that it's done in an open and transparent way, and everybody understands the numbers. And as far as I'm concerned, if ever I felt it was a liability to the council or to the company, then I would shut it down, or at least I'd ask my directors to shut it down. So there's no question about that. But I think it's coming. I think it's coming good now. Certainly is at the moment, and I think it's made a profit. I think of some. Was more than it. I think it was about 354,000. Memory serves me right. But, it's those sort of figures that I think are beginning now to make an effect on it, and we should harvest it. There's no point in spending all that money as we have in the past and then not harvesting the results. So I think that's why I look upon Kindy. But I agree, it's something you've got to keep watching, and any time that we have concerns about the overall viability of it, then we'll look to either resolve them or shut it down. It's as simple as that. On MDC, you're very right to flag the cost of building and so on, and each of the schemes that we have has been evaluated. I'm very pleased to say that with regard to Garrison Point, we are heading for profit there. and I'm quite relaxed about that. I think waterfront was always going to be a very difficult one because of the situation, but I think it's going to make a very good contribution towards the town, the city centre, and I think that will I think be justified. So I think MDC is actually progressing very well. We've got really good advice in terms of the people on the board, and also from Jones Lang and people of that sort. So we're not just fumbling around the dark with MDC. We are actually making sure that we produce stuff which is viable. If it ain't viable, we don't do it. And it's as simple as that. And we have forward port, for example, on various occasions and so on to limit costs. But any time costs get to the point where we can't make profits, then we will stop. We will stop building those at the right time. In other words, if we committed it all and so on, we'll get on and build through it. But I'm not at the moment concerned too much. I think we are actually heading for good times with it. I think if you take 3 schemes together, that will be Mountbatten House, the Garrison Point and the waterfront. I think together they will more than wash their own face. They will actually be not only a great contributor towards the city centre looking good, but actually they will introduce really, I think, quite a different look to Chatham. And what's very encouraging is that a large number of people who live in them are not coming from miles abroad. They are Medway people. So I think that's extremely good. And that's one of the reasons why the First Homes initiative has worked well too. So on those points, that's about them. On the question of the recruitment agency, that was why we did it on Kindy. As regards the legal action, well, that was before my time, and I'm not accountable for that. But I am assured, as I just keep the thing warm, that is proceeding with glacial progress, in my view. But there we are. It is actually, I'm told by the actual. I encountered the police that they are, in fact, met them on. I met the person who's in charge of the whole thing at Armed Forces Day, and they did assure me that they're getting nearer. So let's hope they get on with it.
On that note, thank you very much indeed, Howard. An hour and a half and very detailed responses from you to a very wide ranging portfolio and the questions that were consequent upon you holding that. So thank you very much. Thank you for your previous appearances in this 2019-23 Council as well, and we are indeed very grateful to you and your teams. Thank you. So, colleagues, we will take a break. Steve has been writing for the last hour and 35 minutes non-stop, and he, above all, deserves a break. So we are taking a break of somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Thank you all. Yes. Overview and scrutiny. Thank you so much. We move now to agenda item 6, which is the attendance of Councillor Adrian Golvin. Again, in terms of the individual subjects, as far as we can break them down, we have the 9 bullet point areas, with the exception of the 1st and 5th bullet point, I think it is. There are corresponding paragraphs, and I will draw your attention to those as we go through, and they start on the 2nd bullet point, really, from paragraph 10. But the 1st bullet point is transformation and digital services. Are there any questions on that topic? Councillor Maple, please.
Good evening, Adrian. Welcome. I wondered on your opinion as to where you think we are in the Venn diagram of Medway residents when it comes to the different challenges with this. And I know David Wildey would often speak about one part of this Venn diagram. So you'll have a load of residents who will be saying, why is this council in the 19th century when it comes to its technology? You'll have some residents who will think we're just about the right place, and you'll be some residents who live in fear of our phone line being cut off, which occasionally happens because of technology and all the rest of it. And as the kind of political leader for this, do you think at the moment all 3 groups of residents would be happy with where the council is at the moment?
Thank you, Vince, and thank you for an interesting question, which is actually, yes, we spend a lot of time thinking about. We want to promote digital services, but good quality digital services that people find they're easy to use and will naturally migrate to them. I mean, if you look at the report, you'll see how, in the majority of cases, people are very happy in quite substantial numbers to use the digital services, and that is increasing. But we've also got to accept the fact that there are, and will be for some considerable time, many members of the community who find the technology intimidating, or they don't have good access to the internet, etc. As far as I'm concerned, until we can guarantee 100% delivery to all residents, none of the existing analogue services, if I might put it that way, will be switched off. There will still be a telephone, there will still be somebody to answer people's letters. Yes, we have reduced the amount of people available to answer the telephone over a period of years. That's something that carried on when Councillor Turpin was in charge of that particular part of the service. But it was done in a controlled and thoughtful manner as to balance it with the uptake of the services that are digital. And so that there is an answer. Yeah, we're probably never going to keep everybody happy, but I think it's going to be slow and steady progress, and I think we have made a considerable progress towards providing good quality digital services.
Thank you. Councillor Wildey, please.
Thank you. As Councillor Maple was kind enough to mention me, now, assuming that everyone is happy, moving forward, doing everything by IT, this council did have a task group quite a few years ago now with regard to social isolation. And the council is moving forward to do everything by IT. Are we giving consideration to those people that may contact us, but it will be apparent that they are not talking to almost anyone face to face? And will we pick up on that and do something about it? Point them to the voluntary sector, maybe encourage them to use our libraries, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think I should have followed on with my previous answer from some of the points that Howard was making about the transformation of the hub services are very good at providing face-to-face friendly service. I think even the libraries that are not equipped as hubs as such, the librarians seem to be very good, as far as I can see, at taking up people's issues and trying to sort them out for them. So I think the hubs and the library service will have an important role. And you're right, the voluntary sector does have an important role there. So I think MVA do an excellent job in signposting people to the various agencies, voluntary organisations throughout Medway that are available. And you're absolutely right, social isolation is a significant issue. People think it is just a sort of precursor for mental health, but my understanding is more recent research has said it's a precursor for physical health conditions as well. It would be nice to be in a position that when people get to a certain age and lack of mobility, if we could afford actually to give them all a device, because I think certainly that is a good way of very cost-effective means of keeping people talking to each other. I can just give a little example. The church that I belong to, the WhatsApp group, which is mainly used by the elderly members of our congregation, I just can't keep up with it. I mean, I have to switch my phone off because it's so constantly pinging with them, just sending messages to each other. And I'm talking about people in their 80s and 90s. Gloria will know that. She belongs to the same church. And, that just proves that, don't write older people off for a start of not being able to cope. Many of them do, and I think that's probably one of the plus things that came out of the pandemic, that many older people who thought that this technology was not for them actually gave it a try, and it does work. But it's never ever going to work for everybody. We've got to accept that, and we've got to make sure, as a good council, that we make sure that we've got our services readily available for everybody, no matter their ability to cope with technology or not.
Thank you. You realise I'm never going to be happy on this, but that's me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It doesn't also mean that everyone enjoys using technology, but there we are. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Goldwyn, for coming this evening. The notes I've made are by page, so not by paragraph, so forgive me if I don't get the sections quite right. The transformation of the 17-plus meetings in children's social care, that seems a very positive development. But the third meeting that was held got through 34 cases in an hour. So you're assured that that change is one that is effective for the young people. Sorry, page 47.
Unfortunately, Clive, the copy I've got, which I called out earlier, is the pagination is different because of the printing. Well, what was the paragraph you're referring to, please, Clive?
2.2.3.
2.2.3.
So this is the transition interviews from children in care to care leavers. The plan will be that they will be within 6 months of the young person's 18th birthday. In principle, seems very positive. When it's gone from a bureaucratic system to one that's more responsive to the needs of both the professionals and the young people. I'm just a bit concerned that they can do 34 cases in an hour, is my question. I suppose my question to you is, are you assured that that's a positive development and that that can be done effectively?
As I've not got intimate knowledge of that particular service, I think it would be best for me to get some advice on that, because I would like to say whether that was right.
Well, I think I'll be happy to take that up with the directorate.
Yes.
So I'll do that from my children's
I think that might be best, Clive. But
yeah, no, that's fine. Happy to see the proposal on the moving traffic offences, which we've been consulted on as councillors, but also there's the public consultation. I think that's a really positive development, particularly for Gillingham High Street, where since we've been elected in Gillingham, the control of traffic in the pedestrianised High Street has been a real issue, including one resident who was knocked down by a car that shouldn't have been there, all sorts of problems. So that's a really positive development, and I think we're likely to support that, particularly for Gillingham High Street, but I know it's affecting other areas, so that's just a comment. Final thing on this section is the digitisation of documents that are currently held on microfiche. Your report mentions planning applications. I just wonder what those documents that are currently microfiched, that are going to be digitised, are, if you know what they are. There's a lot of them. It's going to be quite a big job, and clearly the organisation thinks it's worth maintaining a record of them, and in fact transferring that record from microfiche to digitisation. Do we know what those documents are that are on the microfiche?
First of all, the moving traffic one, I think you're right. That does give us a good opportunity to improve road safety, and also if not the purview of this committee, but if I wear my community safety hat, I know that the police would rather not have to use their resources to deal with those more minor issues. But I do think it's important that we treat it as a safety issue, and it doesn't in any way get allowed to be seen as a cash-generating exercise for the council. Yes, hopefully it will cover its costs if people do silly things, but I don't think it would go down very well with our residents if they felt it was just we were keeping a super eye on things and you know, stamping on minor infringements because it's all recorded in order to make some money. So I think there's a bit of a balancing act to be done there. The historic planning documents, my understanding is that it's very useful for the planners to go back on, you know, when you get a planning application on a site that has perhaps had previous applications and you know, to refer back. And at the moment, they've got to, it's clunky. They've got to look at it on microfiche. And also perhaps it gives us the opportunity to get rid of some of the paper documents as well that are still there. I mean, some of them have been microfiche, but we've still got the paper. I believe there's an ex-Oast house not too far away here that's stuffed full of our paper documents. You know, not that it costs a huge amount of money to store them there, but I think ultimately it would be nice to turn them into waste paper and recycle them and not have to pay that cost. But it's all about making the planning service more efficient. You know, our planners have better things to do with their time than just clunk away through microfiche files. If they can have it all digitalised, well, they can work from home and be just as effective, which is, it's what we want to be.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maple, please.
Thank you very much. And just for clarity, through you, Chair, I'm only looking at up to and including 2.19 at this stage, I think. Organisational change, are we including that in this debate, or is that or everything within?
Everything up to page 60.
Wow, we may be some time. I want to move on to CCTV first, so that's looking at 2.19. I'm intrigued, and again, you may not have all of the answers tonight, so happy to receive further information as and when required. Other partners with CCTV assets. Now, other partners with CCTV assets these days could actually be most residents of Medway because of dash cam, because of Ring doorbells where you can now leave voice messages if you want and all of that kind of stuff. So I'd like to understand where our partnerships stop with this. Does it include, for example, Network Rail and South Eastern? You know, they've got in at the moment, while they still have ticket offices. We won't talk about that today. They have quite a substantial amount of CCTV and body-worn cameras on, regrettably, on some of their staff because of antisocial behaviour. So Kindy and other partners, I'd be interested to understand what that looks like. You will appreciate, Adrian, that the CCTV is a very emotive, but understandably emotive issue because of people's concerns and increasing concerns around safety in the community. I think that's absolutely sensible and legitimate for people to raise those concerns. So people will want to understand, what does that mean for us as an organisation, and in particular, you know, how many cameras do we have? We, in the sense of through Kindy, of course, although that could easily be done here as well. I want to raise specifically issues around TUPE of the sign shop services. And again, you may need to go away and get some answers here. I wrote to a senior officer back in March around some of these issues. This is around brown signs, which the purview is probably regen, but as it's on here, I'm slightly, there seems to be a lack of clarity around how do you get a brown sign? Have we ever given any organisations a brown sign for free? Etc., etc. So some clarity around, actually, does this TUPE mean any changes to the council's rules regarding that specifically? I know other colleagues may want to talk about other elements with the sign shop, but certainly I'd be interested on brown signs. And again, if you need to come back to me on that, if you don't have that information, because that is quite a detailed area for concern. And then just the other point I would think I would want to raise with you is around, I guess, general access. It goes back, in part goes back to my first question. There will be a concern from residents in the current financial climate that actually accessing some of their services online as a default, which is the case now for some, is challenging because of whether it's internet access, whether it's using up the data on their phone, whatever it might be. So I guess what would be helpful, again, in that journey, going back to what we were saying earlier on, is just making sure that information is available. And actually, of course, we want to know where the website is, or the email address, or the online form, but actually having that in more detail for the alternatives would be helpful as well. So a proper directory of the ways you can access the council, because I think sometimes we'll just have the website, or we'll just have the access that way. The final point, and it's again specific, this is my final point on this bit, I promise. This is around something we've been promised for some time, and that's effectively the replacement for the Love Medway app. You know, we are all out there in our community. We all have stuff in our community which is frustrating, whether it's fly tipping, whether it is potholes. You know, Phil Filmer's generous offer for us to email him every pothole in Medway. I'm sure that's continuing. But actually, the Love Medway app, for all of its faults, was a really helpful tool for us, and more importantly for residents, to be able to click and send. Now, we have some forms where you can do that. The forms were a bit clunky. Where are we with the basically Love Medway 2.0? Because actually, that from a transformation perspective will make registering stuff easy, and frankly it will take some, not all, but some of the traffic off of social media, because people just want to feel that they've registered it in a way that can be seen, because of course that could be done with the Love Medway app. You could see what other things have previously been reported. So where are we very specifically with that? Thank you.
Right, thank you for those, Vince. First of all, about CCTV. Of course, we've got an external partner in Gravesham Council, who we've got to make sure we look after. In the last few weeks, we've restarted the CCTV consortium regular meetings. I met with my opposite political member from Gravesend, and we had council officer who looked after CCTV Gravesend present as well as our side. So that is very important to us to make sure that our customers, as it were, in Gravesham are happy with the services that's they've been operating. Initially, the cameras that I took an interest in as the lead on community safety were the ones that were, as you rightly said, were connected into the Kindy system and hence been able to use by the Safer Medway Partnership and the police. But there's also a whole other host of cameras within the council's ownership that are not connected to that. There's security systems on community centres, sports facilities, and the like. And it's been a little bit complicated of who's actually assuming responsibility, whether it's leisure services or not. So it seems more economic to actually now bring all that under the purview of one person. And we have appointed a principal contact for all the CCTV cameras within Medway, and that's Matt Pinder. So if any of you've got a CCTV issue, Matt's the guy to get hold of, and Matt will be, I'm sure, be quite happy to sort whatever your concerns out. I mean, we've just had an issue in the last few days because there was a power outage in Rainham, that some of the CCTV cameras in Rainham weren't working, but Matt was able to sort that out with UK Power Networks, and my understanding is that system's all up and running again. So, it's a system that needs constant looking after and maintenance. So that's, I think, is what that's referring to, is to bring all that sort of multitude of cameras. The other ones I should mention is some of the security cameras in the car parks, which are now, under the auspices of parking services. So, we've got cameras all over the place. Different directorates have had responsibility for them. It just seems sensible to get the whole lot sorted out under sort of one person looking after it, and hopefully by that we can get economies of scale. We know we're not ordering equipment from different suppliers, by channeling it all through one individual, make sure that we can get those economies of scale. The sign shop, my involvement in that was purely the business change team being involved in the transfer of the service, as it were, from one section of the other. The idea is that the sign shop becomes more, shall we say, commercially minded. At the moment, the idea of the service is just to cover its costs, break even. But hopefully, if they can take a bit more of a commercial, hopefully they can get some outside work as well, because they make a good job. You can see that at our festivals, where you've had the one-off signs made for the festivals all over the place. So they do a good job of that. Brown signs are very important, yes, for information. And yes, I hope we can provide that service to anybody who would want it at a very cost-effective rate, and that's the whole idea. The more detail of that, Vince, I'm not able to say, because that was not the side I was involved in. The business change side was in the organisational change side of it. As far as signposting people to where they can best get the council's services, I think, if you're not doing it online, I think probably the next best line, as I said, is the hubs. But it probably is an area that we do need to have some think. I think, thanks for bringing the subject up, because I think it is. Signposting is always important, isn't it? Because we all find it very frustrating when we know we should be able to find something, but how do we actually get hold of it? I believe that's probably just as bad for members as it is for our residents out there. So, I think that's probably something we can take. The Love Medway app, yes, I think, we do need to get it. Unfortunately, That was in the pipeline to get a Mark II version of it. I think it slipped down. Perhaps Mr. Watts can remind me, but I think we did have it on the transformation programme, but it seems to have slipped down the list somewhere. But I think perhaps we need something to look at. But I would remind members that the FLS Frontline Services email service is pretty good for members. I've used it in the last few days and got a quick response to my things I wanted to report. So that side seems to be working pretty well. But I think, yes, using modern technology, if you've got an app on your phone, because it gives the GIS position straight away, all the information that the operatives need. And the ideal solution is that our friends at Medway North would have that information going direct to their pads. And that would be a far more cost-effective way of doing things. But unfortunately, I think other things have sort of crept up the priority list. But it's something I think we do need. It's like having a case management system for members. That's another thing we talked about a little while of doing, and I think members could really do. I mean, my own case management system seems to be backs of envelopes and scraps of paper, which is not the most efficient way of doing it. That again is something we've talked about, and perhaps as we leave the present pandemic circumstances and the extra work that the digital team had to do for that. That's something perhaps they can look to doing in the next few months. But I'm sure that Paul Boyd and the team there would be quite happy to look at that.
Okay, I acknowledge Councillor Edwards wants to come in. I wonder if she would forgive me if I just come back to a point you touched on to perhaps conclude that topic, which is 2.8, the moving traffic offences. I have some concerns. I support the principle completely. I have some practical concerns, and they relate to the box junctions. And I know a little bit from colleagues who work in the parking adjudicators role around the country, and indeed. So 2 points. The first is, if we adopt the moving traffic offences jurisdiction, oblique enforcement, will those who receive penalty notices have access to the national scheme for appeals? Point one. And secondly, and this is a real practical concern, you referred to, obviously, the recording of the offence, etc. I'm always very concerned about yellow box junctions, because you can approach a yellow box junction and have reasonable belief that you can exit that yellow box junction, and then the driver in front of you does something which means you are captured, not because you've made a wrong judgment, you are captured within the yellow box junction, essentially for no fault of your own, because you had a reasonable belief that your exit out of the other side of the yellow box junction would be fine. But then they suddenly decide they want to turn right or left against the traffic, and you are captured in a yellow box junction. So what I would like, if possible, is some reassurance that the videoing of these alleged breaches will be sufficient that it captures the car at least in front of the so-called offending car, because the reality may be that it wasn't really the fault of the driver who ends up being caught in the yellow junction. And in heavy traffic in particular, I can think of Strood High Street, for example, that can frequently happen to good drivers.
Absolutely, Chair, I agree. I think this almost entirely concerns yellow box junctions. As far as the appeals process, this is at a very early stage. I mean, the legislation has only just gone through that allows local authorities, and I believe that we were asked whether we wanted to take this on or not. But certainly I think as the things are worked up, it wouldn't be a bad thing to take it to the appropriate scrutiny committee, which I think would be Regen, so that members could have a look at it. Whilst I'm sure the officers will make a really good job of the proposals, it would be a good thing for members to have scrutiny of that. But as I say, we're very much at the early stages of this. I don't think those sort of details have been worked out. Certainly the reports that I've seen on it have been extremely high level. They've not gone into that sort of detail at all. But you're absolutely right that there has to be a robust appeals process. But I hope with the technology we've got now and we will be employing, it will enable us to do exactly that, or indeed members of the public to do exactly that, to get hold of the actual real-time footage and play the thing back and see whether the person was at fault or not. And that brings me to my earlier point. I think we've got to ensure that this is seen as a safety improvement thing for Medway, not as a way of punishing our residents so we can get a bit of extra cash off them, as much as I'm sure the finance department would like the income, but I think there's got to be a really good balance on that. But certainly when this goes through to cabinet, I mean, one of the things I would be very happy to suggest that it goes to scrutiny as well, so members are happy with it when it actually goes to be rolled out in practice. But as I say, we've not even talked about how it's going to work as far as the surveillance cameras and all the rest of it. It's still very, very high level at this stage, Chair. So, but very good points, and obviously we must need to take them on board.
Yeah, I'm really troubled by it because the photographic capture of a vehicle apparently stopped on a yellow box should not automatically, I hope, in the judgment of the person seeking then to enforce a penalty, be assumed to be the fault of that driver. And I think we could cause an awful lot of, as it were, offence and upset of good drivers if we adopt that approach. So I think that, I'm afraid the devil is in the detail on yellow boxes, in my view.
Absolutely, so I couldn't agree more, Chair. I think all of us as drivers have been called out in that situation. Yeah.
Sorry to delay you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. So this question relates to 2.22 on the TUPE of the sign shop services. I note it says that the transfer was successful to Norse at the beginning of April. And I'm just interested in your view on how you think that process has gone and how effective it's operating at the moment. And the reason that I raise that is that I've been waiting many months for a number of signs in my ward. I think back in February, together with Councillors Maple and Murray, we did a site visit to Rochester Cemetery because we'd had a number of complaints from residents about dogs not being on leads, and it was obviously distressing people who were going and visiting family there. And we discovered that the signage was out of date, and we wanted to have some new signs to promote responsible dog ownership. We're still waiting on those signs. I also have a number of fly tipping hotspots in my ward. I have about 4 or 5. And I'm trying to do my part as a local councillor to try and stop that. So I'm writing to residents in those areas. And, I am noticing that I need some kind of visual deterrent. And I understand that these new signs that are being looked at will have QR codes, which will be great. It will enable really quick reporting. But I am finding that I'm having to make sort of weekly requests for Norse to come and pick up these fly tipping materials. It's quite exhausting for me, it's exhausting for Norse who have sort of resource constraints as well. And I understand that these things can take time, and I must say the teams that I've engaged with in both the council teams have been very responsive. But one thing I don't understand is why it's taking so long to produce these signs if the transfer was successful and it is operating effectively. So I'm quite keen to understand why that is, and I guess if there is a backlog, any estimate for when that can be cleared, because I do really need these signs to make the community that lives in my ward, a better place for residents. Thank you.
Very good point. I've not personally heard of any problems. One of the forums I sit on where that would naturally come up is the Medway North Liaison Board, which acts as the client side, where members and officers can ensure that the services are provided. And I know that officers are rigorous with Medway North at those meetings when things are not going to their satisfaction. It's not an issue that I've come across, but I can well believe you would find it frustrating if you want these things. We all want our wards to be best equipped as possible. Certainly, Mr. Platt is making notes. We're certainly happy after this meeting to make some inquiries on that issue. But I've got to say I've not had anything flagged up at the moment. But certainly at the next North Liaison Board, I will make a note of asking that very question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We move to Council Plan and Service Improvement. That's paragraph 10 on page 68. Any colleagues on that topic? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Page 65, if I've got the paragraphs right, the support for Ukraine refugees. Medway communities come together in a very commendable way to support the people having to flee Ukraine because of Russian aggression, and we welcome that that support that's been given and the support in turn that's been given by the council. So on page 65 we have the online resources being collated in a central position. That's a very positive thing, and I commend the officers for doing that and for the support that's been given. There is a however coming. However, some time ago, in response to a question to council by Mr. Goldsborough, who was then leading Medway City of Sanctuary, he asked a question about the council doing precisely this for refugees that were coming to us from, obviously before Ukraine at the time. And the council responded that that would be possible. Events later that same evening, I think maybe clouded things. I think I'm concerned that, I absolutely support the support that's been given to Ukrainian refugees, but we have had refugees coming to us, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, young refugees coming to us seeking asylum, fleeing exactly the same things that the people fleeing Ukraine have come, have run away from: the destruction, in many cases, the destruction by the Russian army and Air Force in the same way. And we haven't provided that support in the past, and I think that's disappointing. And the council leader has been on record that we weren't going to be involved in the national transfer scheme for resettling refugees. So I absolutely support the measures that have been taken, but disappointed that we haven't done it when we've had so much need come to this country in the past. Thank you, Chair.
It's a difficult one, that, Clive, because, I've long felt that the British tradition of offering a safe haven to people in distress is a good thing. Indeed, my ancestors on both sides of the family were in that situation a few generations ago. The Goldwins were French Huguenots who came to England. On the Distaff side of the family, the Markhams were Polish Jews escaping some pogrom in the early 1800s. So, yeah, I've got to, unfortunately, we've become a less generous society, I'm afraid. A lot of people seem to think we're overcrowded, we can't take any more. I would tend on the side to be generous, but not everybody agrees with that argument, I'm afraid. And, you know, and certainly when it comes to migrants across the Channel, this is nothing new. When I was working on the cross-channel ferries 12, 15 years ago, it was a major nightmare for us. You know, we had numerous instances of people boarding the ships when they shouldn't have done. You know, and that was stopped by increased security within the port of Calais. So it's not such an issue. But there were lives lost, and certainly I was on one ship where there was an extremely close call in that the ferries on the bow have what we used to call the spade platform that stuck out of the front of the bow that the loading ramp went onto. The ship had departed Calais going astern during the night, and it was purely because that ship did not have an enclosed bridge wing that the quartermaster, as the ship was turning round, heard somebody who he thought was on the foredeck, and it didn't turn out to be on the foredeck, it was actually on the spade. They were outside of the hull of the vessel. The ship was at that time going ahead, picking up speed. Within a few minutes, the bow wave would have washed them off the ship. We managed to stop the ship, drop a boat and open the doors and rescue the. It's an issue we've had. People are driven to do extraordinary things, and you know, I would hope as a society that we can continue welcoming them. That's a personal view.
Can I just thank Councillor Goldwyn for his candid response to that question, and you know, I hope the voice he has within the administration will lead to change on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask Mr. Platt to note that, as I sit as an immigration and asylum appeal judge, I do not and have not taken part in that discussion. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else in the section of council plan and service improvement, which is where we now are, please? So that's from para 10 on page 68. Councillor Maple.
Thank you very much indeed. And I welcome your previous response to Clive's powerful question and your powerful response, so thank you for that. On the council plan, two questions really. Financial resilience is all well and good, apart from the fact that we've got still 60 pence in the pound less than we had as a local authority, along with every other local authority. We're on our second Secretary of State this week. When we started the meeting, who knows where we are now. So I am concerned around, you know, those are two easy words to have on a page to talk about financial resilience, but the reality is very different. It's difficult. And I wondered if you had some views on that and if there's any message you want to send to Greg Clark in his new role tonight. And then secondly, I note with interest that tackling climate change is one of those council values. I know you occasionally substitute on the planning committee, but I don't think you would be able to take part in a debate on Gun Wharf if it was there. Do you agree with me that it's a good idea that Gun Wharf would have solar panels to cut down on all sorts of bad things in the environment, and actually, fundamentally, even if you don't care about the environment, to help the bottom line of Medway Council?
Finances are always a difficult thing. We'd always like more money to do things, but my take is, yes, we would like the government to give us more money, but there is no magic money tree. One of the reasons why we've got rampant inflation at the moment, not the only reason, but a strong contributory factor, is that worldwide governments have been printing money over the last few years. They call it a fancy name of quantitative easing, but it is printing money. And it's all too easy to say, right, you know, we'll issue government stock, and we know that the Bank of England then will buy that stock and just put it on its balance sheet. I mean, that is not sustainable. So as a society, we have got to make ourselves more as cost effective as possibly be, and that runs right from the government right down to us as local authority area. And I think it's one of the, will be the driver, cost efficiency, and making sure that we've got cost effective services is the only way that we are going to maintain good quality services for our residents. The government is not going to be able to give us large dollars. Having said that, I think that the cuts on local authority grants have been out of proportion with what other parts of the public sector have had to deal with. And I firmly believe that local government is a very good, cost-effective way of providing services for residents. And it seems to be a shame that sometimes the government will look for other places to get things done. Track and trace was a good example of that, wasn't it? That, you know, at the end of the day, it ended up that our public health, because of their local knowledge, was much more able to deliver that service than operating a central services. Climate change, yes, and the Gunwall solar panels. Well, that's an interesting one. Well, actually, I've got a confession to make. It was my capital projects team through the refit programme that put that forward. And I've got to say I was extremely disappointed at the response from our planners, particularly as members of the planning committee were able to have a presentation from SSE, who are acting as our consultants on the refit programme, outlining all the good benefits that will bring. They outlined how many tonnes of carbon a year that would save. I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but it was quite significant. I have to say, I honestly believe that that report that was supposed to be going to the planning committee last week was one of the least professional reports I've seen on a planning committee for a long, long time. Normally, the officers give us the pros and the cons of each application and then give us a reasoned argument why they have made their recommendation either for approval or refusal. That struck me in that report as the person who wrote the report had made up their mind. We weren't going to have it, and that was the end of it. Well, it's not going to be the end of it. I'll tell you now, we will have another report that's more balanced that goes to the planning committee, and I believe that I'm not going to tell the planning committee what to do, but the planning committee...
Councillor Godwin, there are three of us here who are currently members of the planning committee.
So I've been very careful.
I think we might perhaps move to the next point, but we've heard, of course, what you've said.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I've made my position on it quite clear, which is what I wanted to do.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. So we now move to CABS, Customer and Business Support Issues, from paragraph 11, page 69. Any member? Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And just a quickie, actually, on 11.7 on the blue badges. Just as a note of personal interest, I'd recently renewed mine in under a month, and it was a very efficient service. Just slightly concerned at the numbers in a year. We're issuing over 6,000. There's no mention of refusal rate or whether everything is given. And does this flow through into other areas of the council? Because there's going to be a knock-on effect, presumably in terms of parking requirements and also parking income. Is this a joined-up piece of work, or is this just done in isolation?
I hope it is a joined-up piece of work. it's a service that's very important, and we have done a little bit of work on to see whether the blue badge system has been abused. The conclusion of that is not generally abused here in Medway. That's not to say it doesn't happen. I hope, you know, and if it is reported and happened, the officers will take the appropriate action. But I think, generally speaking, you know, the vast majority of people who are have applied for blue badges and have them issued to them use them correctly in the proper manner, and they are entitled, indeed, to have them. I mean, they're not just given out like confetti. We do employ an occupational health expert who goes and assesses whether sometimes actually physically visits the people concerned, but normally would assess the paperwork and make sure that it is in the correct criteria. So I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, can I come back? It doesn't really. We're hoping for, and we're hoping it is. Is there any way we can have something fed back to parking services, for instance, just to say that, because, you know, I'm concerned that if we're issuing so many, we only provide so many spaces, and I'm not aware that's been going up at all. And if another 6,000 are just being given out, perhaps we may need to look at what our provision is across our parking network. And obviously from Phil's point of view, that's a lot of money. I'd say, I swear by it, I've saved £6.50 a day in the multi-storey when I commute to London on it, and that's a lot of money across the borough that people potentially aren't paying.
I think within that figure of 6,000, the vast majority will in fact be renewals. I can't remember what the time scale is, 3 years or something. It's 3 years, thank you, Phil. So the vast majority of those will be in fact renewals. So we're not actually adding, 6,000 each year. I mean, yes, that would cause us enormous problems, agree. And certainly in some areas, I mean, thinking of my own ward, where we've got concentrated areas of where there's elderly persons accommodation, yeah, there is a issue of parking for the rest of the community, shall we say, if there's too many blue badge sites. But my understanding is the spaces are not specifically allocated often. You know, they're in an area and those who are entitled can use it. But so it is an issue that's monitored. You know, we have had discussions about this.
Could I just add before I call in Councillor Maple? Is it right that there is no legislative provision that guarantees that a blue badge holder and user in a municipal car park automatically does not have to pay parking charges? As I understand it, some local authorities do still require that parking is paid.
Some private.
But is there a provision that all local authority car parks must be free of charge for blue badge holders? That's my question.
I think that's a very technical question, Chair, that I think an officer is probably more...
Well, I mention it because
yeah.
Councillor Clark rightly referred to loss of income, as it were. So I just wonder. But anyway, Councillor Maple, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to follow on this, I mean, Phil Watts is right to say that there are certainly other car park providers where the blue badge entitlement is a parking space generally nearer the place that you're parking for, but you would still pay the same standard rate. I hope that this administration doesn't take that opinion, but that will be a matter for them, I guess, as they look to build their budget over the next 8 months. I want to also talk about this issue, but from the other side, actually, and that's the fact that I've not had people contact me about blue badges. It's an issue which the system has dealt with, but in the last year there's been a couple of issues. One is around the fact that there are 2 different pro formas depending on why you are applying. And the system is not really clear. And I've had Paul Boyd, who made an intervention after I contacted him. The system got sorted, but it shouldn't have to deal with that. So I wonder whether there is a technical way of making sure that people basically can fill in one form, and the system will look at the evidence provided and say you qualify under that, or you don't qualify under that, but you qualify under the other criteria. The second bit that sits alongside that is twofold. One is around, do we remind people at 15 weeks to say, actually, from next week, you can reapply now to get your blue badge updated? Because I'm not sure how clear that 14-week window is for people reapplying. Be interested in your view on that. And secondly, on that kind of reapplying, getting evidence from the DWP in particular, not least because they've got a shed load of backlogs at the moment, as have been well documented, can be really challenging. And for one of the two routes, that is, you need to provide some evidence for that. So I guess it's around, do we let people know to apply 14 weeks in advance if we're saying they can do that? Can we have a system which automatically is just filling in one form, and the system, be that a human or electronic, can deal with the separation, otherwise they're getting a rejection when they're absolutely entitled? Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Yes, I do know that Paul's looking at that issue. I'm not sure about the reminders. Certainly that now that 80% are done online, surely giving an automatic reminder for people would not be a difficult thing to do. And given the small remainder, I couldn't see why we couldn't generate a letter to go in the post. I think certainly that's an area that I think that we're well worth looking at. Just before we finish on this, I'd just like to say that out of all the areas in my portfolio, the cabs service are the ones that cause me the least grief. The ladies, and it is mainly ladies, a few chaps in that service, just beaver waving, as you said, all these things happen automatically. I think they're a fantastic part of the organisation, and I know that Rupert had part of that under his portfolio for a while. I think Rupert agreed with me that is they are really unsung heroes of the organisation. They're a highly flexible team, highly adaptable. They just get on doing numerous tasks, and they take on quite a wide range of administrative tasks and functions within the organisations, and they just get on and deal with it. I get a tiny amount of requests for things to be sorted out on their behalf, and the vast majority of those seem to be on the recruitment side. So, it's a service that I have got extremely high regard for, and I'd just like to highlight this evening, because I think there's, it's a part of the organisation that works very, very well and just doesn't get any recognition. So tonight I'd just like to take the opportunity of acknowledging that, recognising that and pointing that out to you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members.
Thank you, and duly recorded. Takes us to complaints policy and management, so that's from section 12 on page 71. Any member on complaints policy and management? No. That moves us to HR, section 13 from page 78. Councillor Maple.
Yeah, thank you. One question, really. I mean, I think the HR team generally do a really good job here in Medway. Certainly, again, that's an area where, if it's failing, councillors hear about it pretty quickly, actually. So I have two questions. One is around exit interviews. I'd be interested to know whether we've got up-to-date information on exit interviews, and are there trends? My concern anecdotally is that people can do the same job either in the private sector, depending on which bit of the council they're in, or for another local authority, again, particularly if it's upper tier services, for substantially more money for a pretty short journey. And with the invention of increased working from home, that may be even more tempting. I've often said, so I'd be interested to know whether we've got some exit interview data, and if you haven't got that to hand tonight, which I suspect you probably haven't, again, if that can be provided to this committee, we might want to take a view on some of that. Secondly, you have got good HR professionals, so it is utterly frustrating that if we have localised pay, and I have a view on that, but we are where we are, that they are not, there is no negotiation. It's a fraudulent process. So, and that's frustrating for trade union professionals, HR professionals, senior management who are involved with some of that conversation as well. If we're going to have proper negotiations, it needs to be genuine and real. And I'm concerned, actually, you'll have HR professionals who will be utterly frustrated if one of the reasons they want to work here is so they can be part of a, you know, not necessarily sat around a table negotiating, but perhaps building pay models. You know, those are really interesting skills for an HR professional. But it seems like it's a fraudulent process, because every year there'll be a set of negotiations based around the quantum of 1%. Every year for the last several years, the leader of the council has gone, I don't want to give you that in the style of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'm going to give you a bit more. No one ever knows actually how that is dealt with. There's no scrutiny of that additional process. So it's really a plea to say, if we're going to have localised pay and pay negotiations, actually let your professionals have some level of negotiation which is meaningful and real. And that works for both sides, really. I think there are professionals on both sides of that negotiation who would probably come up with some innovative ideas which actually may tackle some of those issues of staff leaving and improve staff retention further. So that's a plea. You don't need to particularly respond to that tonight unless you want to. But I hope whoever the leader of the council is, whenever the existing leader steps down before May, I hope there's a conversation about actually that's one thing that needs to be better. There's no point in doing political stunts, because it is actually pretty disrespectful to your HR professionals. Thanks.
Thank you, Vince. First, about the exit interviews. Yes, there are exit interviews. I regularly have one-to-ones with Sam Beck-Farley, formerly head of HR, now goes by the COCO title, which is... I'm not sure what statistics are kept on that, but certainly there's a lot of information that within that it is useful for us. It is very concerning, as you're right. There's local authorities not too far away that are paying considerable amounts. We have a lot of pressures on certain departments. We all know the pressures for social workers, but I can assure you also in the legal team, both in the people team and place team, it's been extremely difficult to both recruit and also retain staff. I believe there could be some flexibility perhaps in the future with Medpay, and I think that's an area which our HR professionals could certainly have a huge role to play, and I think I'll probably leave it at that. Thanks, Vince.
Councillor Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to exit interviews, just a suggestion, if the council doesn't do this already, is to consider having stay interviews as well, where you interview staff who've been there for a while and understand why they've been there for a while. I know that that's a thing that my employer does, and the information can be as valuable as that you get from exit interviews and can really help with retention. So just a recommendation if that's not done already. And then just in terms of technology in council meeting rooms, is there any plan to maybe have some better technology to enable hybrid working? Obviously, I note later in the report there's comments on recruitment issues, and obviously money is tight. But flexible working is one of the employment conditions that the council is now competing with other employers on, as well as obviously the slightly more important pay, which obviously Councillor Maple has already touched on. But I do think it's important both for employees of the council and the service that they provide to Medway residents as well, that the council has sort of effective hybrid working technology and practices. I know it has the practices, but interested in the technology that might be coming. And then just a final question on, I think it's paragraph 17.1, which touches on the council's apprenticeship academy. It sounds like there's some really positive work that's been happening in that space, and obviously a level of reporting is going to the Department for Education, I think it is. But I noticed that targets will be not required after 2023, and I'm just wondering if you have an indication whether the council itself will be setting targets for having people on those apprenticeships, because as I said, it does sound very positive, and I wouldn't want to see the momentum lost after 2023. Thank you.
On that, I don't think we've had specific staff stay interviews, but what I do know we have had regular intervals of the past is quite extensive staff surveys to get the staff's views on issues, and certainly there's been quite a lot done on that with home working and that sort of thing. You're right that we do need to improve our technology for hybrid working. One of the things we want to do in Gunwharf is to have more sort of drop-down areas where people can get together and also still communicate with team members who may are not in the building. I mean, there are some of the small rooms that are able to do that, but I think we need more of that. You're absolutely right, because hybrid working system is the way forward. But now with the Ministry of Justice taking over a substantial part of the second floor, there's actually no way you could fit everybody in anyway now. So we've got to work that way, and I personally think it's working very, very well indeed. I think in the majority of cases it's actually improved staff efficiency, and you're absolutely right that providing those sort of things makes things more attractive for members to say. And I think it's the same with apprenticeships as well. I mean, if you look at I think it says somewhere in the report the age range of the people who've been on the apprenticeships. I think it goes, it was 17 to 55. But I think yesterday I was right, being youngest being 70-year-old and oldest being 55 years old. I think one thing we are quite good as a council is giving our employees the opportunity to take further qualifications and improve their career prospects. I mean, that's one of the areas that we've been using within the legal area for some time. We've been encouraging people to become apprentices so they can become paralegals, and then moving the paralegals on with further qualifications so they can become fully qualified lawyers. They don't always stay with us after that process, unfortunately, but I think it's right and proper that we do that. We can't expect just to be able to go into a market and get people in if we're not actively encouraging that market to grow in the first place. So certainly right from people starting right through to people who are then taking master's degree in business administration, so right across the spectrum of skills, and that is available, and I think it's a good thing. And I think the other thing is that Medway Council as an organisation, I think, has been very good at making the best use of the apprenticeship levy. I think, I think every pound that we have to put to one side for an apprenticeship levy has been used in order to improve our staff's skills and training. So, you know, that's the way forward. And I think that's probably one of the most cost-effective ways that we can, you know, help our staff. Unfortunately, we're not in a position to give them the pay rises that a lot of them, you know, undoubtedly deserve. But, you know, this is one way of making us a good employer.
I'm just going to invite Mr. Watts, because to deal with the point Councillor Edwards raised about stay interviews. Mr. Watts.
So in terms of the stay interviews, we do conduct them, but we couldn't do them across the whole kind of range of services. So they're targeted at those areas where we've got a particular issue in terms of retention.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Staying with investing in and recognising key elements of Medway's workforce, I'd like to talk about the term time only staff and the way that Medway's been dealing with that. So that's page 79 on ours. I haven't got the, oh yes I do, 22.1. I think, and we've said consistently over the last few months that Medway's acted poorly towards term time staff in this what's rapidly turning into dispute. The staff concerned work within schools. They're part-time, they're predominantly, though not exclusively, female. And I know from my own experience in schools that teaching assistants make a real difference to the lives of young people, particularly the ones that need most support. Medway, I think, has dealt with this issue shabbily. Other, including neighbouring authorities, have settled more generously. And by more generously, we're talking about in terms of the money that we pay to an individual worker, relatively small sums of money. So Kent has offered twice as much. Greenwich has offered 5 weeks instead of Medway's 2 weeks. The Oasis Academy offered 6 weeks, which is the maximum backdated, so it can be backdated 1 year for each, 1 year per year of service, up to 6 years legally. So I think if we're wanting to support, develop and recognise a workforce that worked all the way through the pandemic, that supported our young people through the pandemic, we ought to be doing better than we have done so far. So there's that point, but also, you know, my question to you as portfolio holder, what have you and other relevant portfolio holder colleagues done to talk to the workforce, to talk to their representatives, to try to get to the bottom of the dispute, to try to recognise the real concerns that they have and to provide a resolution that's much fairer for them? Thank you, Chair.
Well, I think as you can see from the report, there was a different response from to different trade unions. I don't think it'd be right, proper for me to get into the details. All I would say is other authorities may be in a position to be more generous than we are. If we are more generous to this, yeah, albeit small part of our workforce, something else has to come out of the budget to compensate for that. You know, we have a fixed budget each year. Once the budget is set, if you want to spend more on one area, you have got to cut something elsewhere in order to make that balance, that budget balanced. It's not always easy to do. I believe that this, all right, might not be an over generous offer for a settlement, but I think it's probably a fair one. And my understanding is it does compare favourably with deals that have been done in other parts of the country.
Councillor Opara.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Galvin, for being here. Lots of positive things. Before I go on, Chair, the Kickstart scheme is actually mentioned here. My business obviously participated in recruiting Kickstarters as well, so just for the record.
That is noted.
So lots of positive things about our employees. I mean, I quite like the fact that we have the employee engagement toolkit for managers, and I'm glad to hear that we are conducting stay interviews and what have you, and obviously several, according to 13.4, several short surveys have been sent off to staff. What I would have liked to see here is some of the outcome of those surveys. You know, what are the staff saying? How are they responding to the way we are working with them? So I'm wondering, through you, Chair, if there's a way we can, perhaps a briefing note, because it would be good for our staff to know that we as members, we are concerned. We do want to hear from them. We do want to know how, and they're, obviously, how they are feeling about what we're offering them. If we could have a briefing note with regards to these short surveys or whatever that you've done in the past to inform us about the welfare of our staff, if that's possible. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Gloria. You know, the welfare of our staff is, but thought occurs to me, I leave it open to members here. Instead of just having a briefing note on this subject, perhaps could we get Sam Beck-Farley to, in the autumn, to have a members present, briefing and presentation on HR issues across. You know, it would be a good learning opportunity for all of us to, have an update. Ask Sam the questions which, detailed technical questions which I'm not qualified to answer. I'm sure Sam would be willing to do this. Would that be an idea, just so we can, all of us learn a little bit more? Phil, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, well, obviously we would be happy to provide a briefing for members, but I think we need a much clearer spec about what you want us to present on, really. Mm-hmm. That's all I'd say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, we'll pick that up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest perhaps at the next pre-agenda meeting.
Yep, absolutely right. Yeah, we will pick, the three of us will pick that up. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Colleague, Councillor Turpin.
I've just seen here that the Cabinet Office have requested that all local authorities must implement the baseline personal security standard checks prior to users obtaining access to data, etc. So have we completed this? Are we up to date with all that, the new requirement from the Cabinet Office? That's 19.2.
My understanding we are. Phil, can you give me an idea that whether I'm correct in that, please?
And I refer it to Keith, and he assures me that we are.
Right, yeah. I thought that was my understanding, but I thought I'd better just check.
Thank you, colleagues. That takes us to ICT, paragraph 37 from page 87. Any member? So, Councillor Mabel.
Just a quick one, and I should declare an interest because I think the power on my laptop's about to go at any minute. We obviously spent quite a lot of money quite quickly, in part because of COVID, but in part because of certainly system improvements. I think I seem to recall hundreds and hundreds of Surface Pros going to, was it social workers, I think. Can you give us some reassurance that some of that equipment will be coming to its natural life? The good people of Microsoft are very clever like that. So is there a level of funding available for natural replacement of the ICT? Because otherwise we're going to end up with big chunky bills and perhaps not the funding to pay those bills. and we won't be able to log on to argue about those bills.
I mean, yes, we did have a sort of uplift in the provision of this sort of gear during the pandemic, but that wasn't anything new. I mean, we through the transformation program, we've had a program to equip out social workers for mobile working, using mosaics, which has been ongoing. I think we've now got to the stage where all of us are, in this room, many members have got laptops in front of them. This is the way it's going to be for the future. And I hope, I presume, Phil, you will be making allowance in the budget build for that equipment to be replaced and indeed enhanced. I mean, that is all part of our transformation programme to make the council more efficient. And, I presume it's been built into the budget build, Phil?
Yes, it has. So within the ICT budget, there's an annual contribution, goes into an ICT replacement fund to do exactly what you've just described.
Thank you, colleagues. That takes us to legal, section 38, page 89. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. This won't necessarily need to draw a comment from you, Adrian, but we spoke earlier about the support for the Ukrainians and the refugees that the Council's done, very commendable. On the other side of that coin is the judicial review, challenging the government's mandating of the National Transfer Scheme for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. I appreciate that the issue, it does have some complexity because children's services are inadequate and they're working hard to come out of that, and it would provide an additional strain on children's services in Medway were we to have unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. But it is shameful for us, really, to be in the position where we can't take our fair share of these most vulnerable young people who have fled terror and bloodshed across the world, and that we can't accommodate them. And not only are we not able to accommodate them, we're actually going to take the government to court to stop them obliging us to take part in that scheme. I think for us in Medway, that's a cause of some shame. Authorities throughout the country are taking unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and we should be doing our share. Thank you, Chair. As I say, I'm not necessarily drawing a comment from Councillor Goldwyn, who was very open earlier. Thank you.
Clive, I think you've made your point.
Councillor Maple.
Thank you very much. I refer to paragraph 38.5 and 38.6, and this is around staffing levels. And obviously at this year's budget that was set in this very room, there was quite clear savings being sought and improvement in service, with a quite substantial restructuring, effectively, of how we do legal in this place. And I'm concerned that at the moment, paragraph 38.5 and 38.6 don't fill me with huge confidence at this stage that we will meet those savings targets, which are important for a balanced budget, but more importantly, actually get us away from paying over the top for locum legal experts. And that's not good. Ultimately, that's not good for the residents of Medway, because a locum, by the very nature of them, could decide to not come back having been halfway through a case. So are you confident as portfolio holder that both the savings which are built into the budget, which is already based on millions of pounds of non-recurring spend, so those savings need to happen, But actually, it's about the improvement in service as well. And are you confident that we're going to get to that place within this financial year?
What I will say is that the AD for Legal and Governance is very focused on this issue at our regular one-to-ones. It's a subject that we talk about. There are issues, you're absolutely right, about having to use locum staff, which is less efficient, not just in cost, but also in having to constantly train people up in our way of doing things. But I am confident that Pender will do his level best to make sure that we achieve the targets that we're aiming for. I know he's certainly very, very focused on it.
Councillor Turpin, please.
Yeah, what worries me about this one on the legal is this severe shortages issue, severe challenges with staff retention and recruitment. And I know you're talking about it, but have we done an impact assessment? Because some of the other, is this linked to the average duration of childcare, court proceedings being 49 weeks, etc. So, I mean, this will have a human cost if that service is buckling under the strain. And when you start using words like severe, it could be. It seems like a cry for help from that service. What is the performance of that service in those vital areas? You know, what are the knock-on effects on that? I mean, do we need to raise the pressure on this? Because I know that we had constant with social workers. You know, we were constantly mentioning that they were recruitment and retention of social workers was difficult, and you know, but it only really blew up when we had a failure of the Ofsted. So, you know, is this the same situation where we really need to up the pressure and have some really detailed discussions across the board of how we can solve this, rather than just acknowledging it and then waiting for a big issue?
I'll show you the CAFCAS report on the 26, where we are meeting or not meeting the 26-week target is one of the subjects we talk about every month. I have to say that Medway is not an outlier in this. CAFCAS publish a map of England and Wales with each of the court areas on, and the last time I saw a copy of that map, I think there was a tiny area somewhere in the west of the Midlands that was green. The entire rest of that map was red. So we're not an outlier, unfortunately, but it's, well, fortunately we're not an outlier, I should say, but unfortunately we're not in a position where we are. I think one of the issues that is some of the cases that are making us not so good here in Medway, some of these cases are extremely complicated. We have several cases where the children have got relatives or associations with other countries, so a lot of the documents have had to then be translated from another language into English and vice versa. This all adds to the delays. Some of these cases are rather. That's not making an excuse, but that is the case. Certainly, the people team are very keen to get this down. We have got it down. The graphs at one time were steadily pointing back to where we wanted to be, but unfortunately over the last year that's now been reversed. But certainly when Perry Holmes was in the position of running legal, and again now the Pinder's running it, it's an area that is under the spotlight the whole time. We're not complacent about it, and I'm fully supportive on the officers, to what steps they want to take to ensure that improves. But I think the overall thing, as I said earlier, legal have been very good at improving the capability of the staff we have got. As I said, training up paralegals, to get their full legal qualifications. That's the way forward, and we certainly need to do more of that. It's not the whole answer, but certainly it's going to make a big difference. But certainly the court itself has, in the past, we have had, shall we say, a gentle rap over the knuckles from the senior judge in the area. That's not been the case for the last few years. And I believe the judiciary, if they felt that Medway Council was not pulling its weight and doing it properly, they're not afraid of telling us so. But it's been a long time since we've had that, to the best of my knowledge, that rap over the knuckles. The court does regularly have liaison meetings, with our senior members of our legal team over this, and indeed the social workers, because it is a vital part. People always look at the social work side of it, but the legal side of it is a very important supporting factor on that. And both the social workers and the childcare lawyers work very, very closely together. And I think that's another thing that is working better over the last few years. The social workers and the legal side are working a lot more closely together, and I think certainly when I took over the portfolio, I got the impression there was a little bit of friction, dissatisfaction on both sides. I'm not getting that picture now. I'm getting one of much better close cooperation. That's not to be complacent, though. We're far from where we want to be, and you're right, Rupert, to raise that this evening, because it is a very important issue. I can assure you that it is closely looked at. I mean, it's something that Pembroke and I talk about every month, and so it is being looked at, and I'm sure Bhupinder will get it put right. I mean, Perry Holmes also struggled with this as well, so it is nothing new.
Okay, let's move on, colleagues, if we may, to category management / procurement, section 39, page 90. Any member? Okay, if not, that brings us on to travellers, so section 4040 from page 92. Councillor Etheridge, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Most members here will recall at a Regeneration, Culture and Environmental Overview Scrutiny panel that was held in October last year, a number of assessments that were fundamental to the local plan or the production of the local plan either incomplete or non-existent. Following that scrutiny committee, I attended this committee as a member and questioned Councillor Golvin on his report on travellers at the time. And members may recall it was very, very weak. And therefore, I'm extremely pleased to see in this report there's something more positive. In that the planning service, it says at 40.2, the planning service commissioned a gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment as part of the evidence base for the new Medway local plan. However, within the cabinet papers for the housing delivery test action plan for this month, on page 159 3.3, it says quite clearly a technical evidence base is being developed and has included a number of key working streams that will inform the plan, including 5 of those assessments that was identified in the Regeneration Committee. But there is no mention, once again, of this assessment. So I'm just wondering, Councillor Golvin, should this have been included, or if it was left out deliberately, why?
I don't think anything's been left out deliberately, Councillor Etheridge. This will all come into the local plan. We will, by the time the local plan gets to the stage where it is ready to go in front of the planning inspectorate, all those documents will have to be there. As you well know, otherwise we will not get our local plan through that process. So I'm assured by the planning officers that this work is being done, and but I do not have responsibility for the local plan. My main responsibility as far as travellers is concerned is under the community safety aspect in dealing with the, I would say not day-to-day, but the occasional incursion that we get. But obviously this does bear in on it, because there is some argument to say that, you know, if you have allocated sites for travellers to be sent to, some say it makes the situation better, but other people say it makes it worse. I will keep open judgment. But certainly as far as the more settled traveller community here in Medway, I think they have you know, fitted in our community exceptionally well. In fact, I think most people would not even know where those traveller sites were, because they tend to get themselves to themselves and be tucked away down country lanes. You know, and I think those people are, you know, well worth providing for. But the best way of providing it is through the planning process. I think having sort of visitor sites, I think on balance would actually create more problems than it solve. The main issue being that wherever we would position a dedicated site for that purpose, I'm pretty certain that the vast majority of the local people in that area would not be very happy at all.
Okay. Final question, Councillor Maple, please.
Thanks very much. And again, Adrian, thank you for your detailed answers throughout. I just want to turn to, and this is just in the phrasing of the paragraph, so some clarity would be helpful. 40.3, I'm trying to understand whether that is that piece of commissioned work going to come up with one report that covers Medway and Gravesham? Are they going to come up with two separate reports? Are they going to look at the combined number, and if Gravesham's got the need for 18 pitches and 2 plots, you know, I understand completely commissioning some work with Gravesham in general. Local plans and all the reports that feed into them are sometimes a bit contentious, funnily enough. So I was just trying to understand whether the commissioning is literally, we've asked them, we've done a joint contract with Gravesham and they're going to produce 2 separate reports, and it's just that we've commissioned with them because it's cheaper to buy 2 reports rather than 1. If it is as simple as that, or if there's more to it, because the paragraph is a little vague.
My understanding, Vince, is that we jointly commissioned. I mean, we do work very, very closely with Gravesham on various projects. We have I can imagine where this has come from, because we've got a joint legal service between the two authorities, and they've probably initiated that work. I may be wrong, but that is certainly my understanding. But you're right, it's not that clear, is it? So.
Okay, well, thank you very much, colleagues. Adrian, thank you very much indeed. And as I said to Howard earlier, thank you for your previous appearances before the Scrutiny Committee as well during the 2019-23 Council. Thank you very much indeed for all your comprehensive items, and again covering a very wide spectrum of topics and subjects within your portfolio. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Chair, for that. And thank you, members, for your very detailed questions. It's good to be kept on the spot, shall we say, keep the mind working. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope you're not going to have to be here much longer, because I'm off for a nice glass of wine shortly.
Okay. Well done, thank you. So, colleagues, we move to our final agenda item from page 95, item 7, This is the work programme, and as usual, when we consider work programme, I will hand over to Stephen Platt to take us through that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've actually nothing to add to the report, so I'll just invite members' comments on the current work programme at Appendix 1, please. Councillor
Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues of this committee will remember Councillor Maple's calling, or the Labour Group's calling for the Queen Street decision, and there's a similar, though unrelated, issue which resulted in a members' item to Children's Committee based on the Gillingham Football Club report that went to Cabinet. That was a members' item. We would have called it in, but it worked better as a members' item. The Children's Committee, because although the issues were separate, the implications and the issues were very similar. The Children's Committee endorsed the recommendations that were made by this committee in response to the Queen Street call-in. And we on that committee associated ourselves with those issues and how they needed to be resolved. However, there was one issue that related to the GFC issue that wasn't relevant to the Queen Street call-in, and that was the issue of institutional corporate memory. An issue that was discussed was about how emails, and I've added to it myself the idea of documents which are lost to the organisation when an officer leaves. So as came out in that GFC discussion at Children's Committee, those email accounts are closed. We were told that those emails are therefore lost to the organisation, and I would add to that any documents that were held under those officers' individual OneDrives or whatever. So that situation seems to be likely to get worse as the years go by. So there's going to be an increasing distance between the work that appears on here and where it's stored and how it's accessible as the years go by. I think our view at the committee, and I think I'm speaking for both sides, was that was unacceptable for an organisation to be losing that amount of information when officers leave. So I would like to, or we would like to, ask for a report to this committee on that issue. It may be that some of the details need to be ironed out, and I understand that there may be discussions about us, not notifying you about the detail. But in principle, it's how does the organisation deal at the moment with officers leaving, and what proposals are there to change that practice at the moment to ensure that emails and documents are retained within the organisation and accessible. You don't need me to labour the point, but particularly for senior officers, to suddenly lose their emails is drastic. To lose those documents may be drastic, and have a real impact on issues that may need some looking back on in years to come. So I'd like that report to this committee. This seems to be the relevant committee for it to come to. And as I say, it sits alongside the other issues that I think are going to result in a Cabinet report. It is an additional issue to do with that institutional memory. My first job was working for Waltham Forest Housing Department, as I shared with the Children's Committee. My suspicion is that there are hard copies of letters that I wrote that are still in filing cabinets somewhere in Walthamstow. I hate to think, but they probably are. But emails that were sent by officers that left only 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, are not now available. And that's just not right for us. So that's my proposal to this committee, that we have that report. Happy to sort of think through the details with officers that might be relevant if they need it to be thought through. But it's basically pretty straightforward, I think.
Okay, thank you. So E17 still has your hard copies.
I imagine so.
Okay. I think it's a very, very fair point. It's not a point that we've discussed here before. I think we need to know more, although I'm slightly intrigued because if any officer is using the Medway domain, as it were, for emails, their address including medway.gov.uk, does not, in a sense, the intellectual property therein remain with the council anyway? Are we just talking about us not having a system that ensures we have access to those when the employee leaves? Mr. Watts, can you comment?
And I'm happy to bring some kind of briefing back about this. I think we do need to be clear what the issue is, because the monitoring officer has advised around, and this is all tied in with GDPR and maintaining email traffic. But I suppose there's a nuance here, isn't there, about how email is used these days. And for me, I think it's about the recording of decisions. So decisions that are made by the administration or by the council are recorded and maintained and kept on our records as sort of publicly available. But where decisions are made and instructions given under delegation, that can be done by email, and therefore you're losing some of that. So I think it's a valid point that you raise, and probably needs to be looked at. But I think we just need to be clear about what it is that we're trying to retain, I guess.
I'll come to Councillor Johnson. I mean, there must be, in any process that leads ultimately to a democratic decision, as it were, there will be stages. And stages might include ad hoc reports, ad hoc views, which might be in the form of an attachment on an email from one officer or one department to another, etc., that could nevertheless thereafter perhaps still be of relevance or need to be resurrected. And so I see Councillor Johnson's comments would sort of aptly cover those circumstances. So in other words, not the documents of the final decision, they're there, but interim documents, interim correspondence, interim opinions that we might still need to look back on even after the decision. That's how I would see it. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, and thank you, Phil, for that. The issue has come up because those final decisions have come into question, haven't they? In both cases, there wasn't the document trail in order to properly investigate an issue. Sorry, all of this is blue paper, isn't it? So I need to be a little bit careful. Yes. So where a decision comes into question years later because potentially, hypothetically, that final decision trail isn't there, or maybe there but needs to be looked at again, those are the circumstances in which we then have to start, have to start looking. It's where I guess there's that investigation element, but there's also the auditing element, the ensuring that the decision has been taken adequately.
Yeah, it's not necessarily financial, but it is still an audit issue, as you say, and the trail is needed. Yeah. Okay, so, Councillor May.
It's on a separate issue, so if there's anybody else on that.
Okay, no. Oh, yes, Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, just in terms of, I guess, providing that information, I think it would be very useful to have an understanding of what the council's record management process is, to what extent staff understand what the requirements are for recording decisions, because, I do agree that we need an audit trail so that years later we can look back and we have that transparency about how decisions have been made and who they've been made. And I just think we need to make sure it's absolutely clear to everybody at the council what the requirements are, and also that some mechanism is there to check that that's being adhered to as well. I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor May.
Yeah, thank you. It's just a statement, really, more than anything else. I note that the report that was agreed in that closed session is due to go to Cabinet in, I think, 2 weeks' time. I've not seen a draft of that, and I recall explicitly there was due to be a conversation with the Vice Chairman, the Chair, and the Opposition spokes. That hasn't happened. I'm concerned that I'm concerned the first time I see that report is when the Cabinet papers are produced, frankly, and that wouldn't be acceptable. I hope that can be relayed accordingly. And I'm very happy to have a meeting as soon as practically possible for the three of us, plus obviously the author, to make sure that that happens. I wouldn't want it to be delayed, not least because of the additional support for the primary concerns. And again, I won't stray into those tonight. But it's just a practical thing that I've not seen a draft. I've seen nothing, and I would suspect at this stage that conversation needs to be happening pretty quickly if it's going to hit that deadline for Cabinet in July.
Okay, thank you. Just to assure you that I've not received anything. I'm sure Mr. Watts has taken that on board. Yeah. Okay. Colleagues, well, thank you very much indeed. Dare I say it, I think a reasonable length meeting, but again justifying the committee's previous endorsement that for certain meetings our primary business should be our acts of scrutiny with Cabinet members, and I would hope you would agree that's worked out reasonably well this evening. So thank you all. My thanks to the officers who are here, to Dan and to Paul down there, and particular thanks again to our 3 substitute members who have come along this evening. Thank you all. Oh yes, we do need to note the work programme. Is that moved?
Yeah, thank you,
Is there a
Chair.
seconder? Councillor Etheridge. Members happy with that? Thank you all. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night to you. Thank you.